Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Promise by Anima Nebbioso. The Straw Hats meet a marine girl who Luffy supposedly knows. It's me! Luffy! I don't know any Luffy. That's funny, he laughed. He stopped when she didn't laugh with him. Can you guess what happens next? They kidnap her. Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios!
Welcome to Mizu Cafe. I'll be right with you in a moment. Haruhi called from one of the tables as she heard the bell ring for the front door. Yo, Oni-san. Riku said casually with a towel on her head as her sister finally came around towards her. Oh, Nei-san. I see you've finally gotten the color out of your hair. She laughed a little as she walked on to the next customer who needed her. She left Riku to walk to sit at the bar and brought her some water. You're not going to visit Luffy-kun? She asked, leaning on the counter across from her. She shook her head and downed the cold water. No, why? She then eyed Haruhi suspiciously. When were you guys friends? Haruhi smirked evilly in her mind. Ah, well. I was thinking of visiting him later, perhaps when I get off of work. You're kidding. I kid you not. She then giggled. I just want to see if he recognizes me, she said quietly yet loud enough for Riku to hear. This of course caused Riku to spit out the water she was drinking with wide eyes. What do you mean if he recognizes you? Haruhi winked. It's a secret. Riku opened her mouth to protest, but the bell of the front door sounded and Haruhi had to work. An hour later it was afternoon and Haruhi was supposed to be off of work, yet customers kept pulling in and the owner had to call in more help. Riku sat there waiting, and when Haruhi had a small break she paced towards Riku. I'm sorry, Nei-san. But could I ask you to go visit Luffy-kun in my favor? Riku didn't expect this, but before she could reply, Haruhi took the silent shock as a yes. Great, and Riku? Haruhi's voice drifted a little. Yeah? Anything else you want me to do? She asked with a hint of bitterness. Haruhi quickly shut her mouth. Never mind. I'll be sure to see you off. Riku raised an eyebrow at this but didn't question. Who knows what kind of excuse her sister could come up with? She decided to leave the question in her mind to ponder about it later. As she walked in the streets towards where Luffy and the crew were staying, she heard something that caught her interest. Hey, did you hear? Vice Admiral Garp is here from headquarters, a man had whispered to his buddy. No way. I hope they don't arrest the Straw Hats, his friend said back. Ever since the Straw Hats came back, they've been treated as heroes for saving Iceberg's life. Riku wondered what they've done since coming into the Grand Line and had to admit they were nice people. It was decided that she would do some research later back at HQ. When she finally made it to the house, there were many Marines standing in front and some shouting going on, though she couldn't quite make out the words as she wasn't paying enough attention. Before Riku had made it to the house, there was a small reunion going on between four boys. It's me, Kobe, don't you remember? The boy with pink hair and a bandana said. Luffy of course remembered the name, but when he thought back to the Kobe he and Zoro knew, he thought of the little coward Kobe. I've got a friend with that name, but I only know that smaller Kobe. I'm that Kobe. The crybaby that couldn't do anything, that's me, Kobe had stated proudly. Of course, this shocked Luffy and even Zoro. No way. Luffy shouted with his eyes out of his socket. You're that Kobe? Why are you here in the Grand Line? Zoro asked as he thought he and Luffy left him in the East Blue. The two were still in awe as they listened to his explanation of coming to see them. Riku had made her way through the crowd of Marines. Excuse me, she said politely as she passed the final Marine and saw at the center there was Luffy, Zoro, and two other boys. All four stared at her and she stared back. The one to break the silence were two. Riku, Luffy and Garp both yelled in surprise. With that, it seemed to affect two other people who also called her name. Are Riku, Kobe and Helmeppo stuttered. Hey, am I interrupting something? She pointed in the direction she came from. I could just come back another time. Are Riku-san, are you okay? Kobe had asked worriedly. She whipped her head towards him and stared. He shrunk a little under her gaze. Him? Who are you? The boy face seemed to face palm as he stated his name. It's me, Kobe. She tilted her head a little. I know a Kobe, but he's way tinier than you. She showed about how tall he was compared to her by hand. It's me, I'm that Kobe. Of course Riku was standing there like an idiot for a while with her mouth hanging open halfway. And no way. Past the broken wall she heard Nami sigh. I feel like we just heard this conversation. Riku, I'm glad to see you're doing well. Garp came out and greeted her. Ah, yeah. I'm guessing Chaki told you about my predicament. Riku rubbed the back of her head in embarrassment. Garp looked sternly at her than at Luffy. But still, to think you'd get caught by my grandson. I thought I trained you better than this. I'm sorry, I was caught off guard. She stopped mid-sentence. Wait, what, your grandson? Nami couldn't help. A little late to the party Riku, she casually said. Riku glanced at Nami still in disbelief before turning back to Garp. Her face hardened a little as well as her words. Is there anything else I need to know, Garp-sensei? She emphasized the sensei part. Now, it was the crew's turn to be bewildered. He's her teacher? Gosh, a little late to the other party guys, she said to them. Some of the Marines who knew her well snickered. Nice to have you back, Mikazuki-san, they said. She grinned at them. Glad to be back. She turned to look at Garp, who ended fixing the wall he broke because his soldiers told him it was his fault. She face-palmed as she saw him picking his nose at the same time. It was quite a sight. By the way, Luffy, I heard you met your father. Riku looked to Luffy for his response. Huh? Dad? You mean I have a dad? She couldn't help but sigh at his response. He didn't tell you? He told me he sent you off at Logia Town. Nami, Zoro, and Sanji's interests were piqued as well as Luffy's. They all wanted to know who his father is. Your father's name is Monkey D. Dragon. He's a revolutionist. Of course everyone freaked out. Marines jumping everywhere. Luffy's crew in deep shock. Monkey D. Dragon was no ordinary revolutionary. He was the one in charge, the leader. Everyone knew, except for Luffy. Riku was shocked. She admits that Luffy being the son of Dragon is something new. And Big and the Marines will be using the information at their disposal. But something else was bugging her. Don't pick your nose when you're talking about something serious. She punched across the back of his head. This triggered him to remember something else though. Oops, I wasn't supposed to say that, but wahaha, please forget what I just said. He laughed it off as nothing. Baka. She before everyone screamed in confusion. One day, I'll become a Marine Admiral, Kobe shouted at the top of his lungs. Realizing what he just said, he fell to his knees and covered his face in embarrassment. Kobe. Luffy's yell caused Kobe to stop and look up. If you're going to fight me, then you've gotta be one, of course. Next time we meet, we'll be much stronger. This caused tears to form in Kobe's eyes, causing Zoro to smirk. What, are you still a crybaby, Kobe? Bowing his head, Kobe thanked them. I'm really glad I got to see you two again today. When lifting his head back up, he looked at the two through blurred eyes. As he felt more tears starting to emerge, he felt a hand settle onto his head. He tilted his head back. Riku? She grinned. Garp sent me back to fetch you too. Kobe stood back up with more energy. We'll become stronger, so let's meet again in the new world. Helmeppo could also feel his heart pumping. Be prepared for it, punks. Yeah. Then if you want to become stronger, your first task if defeating me. Riku got into a fighting pose. Her eyes full of life. The two responded with a nod and got into that happened. She let hers fall and stood straight again. Baka, I'm still in recuperating. She then turned around and started walking back towards the harbor where the ship was anchored. This caught Luffy's attention. Riku, where are you going? I hope you didn't forget Straw Hat. I'm a Marine. She said, never looking back. She thought she heard some scuffling behind her but ignored it. What she didn't know was that Zoro was holding Luffy back before he could try and stop her. When they were slightly surprised to find a second Marine ship docked next to theirs. There were two people in the distance talking. Before Riku could figure who they were, they saw her first. One of the figures ran towards her while the other walked. The face finally came into view. Chaki. Riku's eyes had widened. What are you doing here? Glad to see you too. We were patrolling the area when I got a message from Garp-san. He told me you were here. Chaki casually explained. You okay? Those pirates didn't rustle you up, did they? She asked with a slight hint of worry in her voice. Riku nodded. I'm fine. Maybe just a little tired. The sun hadn't even set yet, a lot has already happened. Chaki nodded as if understanding and moved out of the way so Riku could get on the ship that she was given for sailing. The next day she went to visit the cafe, but when Haruhi wasn't there, she went back to the inn. The room looked just as she had left it. She looked towards the picture of the two young girls on the desk and a small smile had made its way on her face. She then turned around and left. She spent the rest of the day with the Marines who were welcoming her back and for her safe return. Riku slowly walked back to the ship. It was the day they were going to set sail again. She went back to the inn once again and the cafe, but her sister was nowhere to be found. She hung her head and stared at the ground all the way until she made it towards the docks. Her eyes landed on someone's shoes. She stopped in front of them as she guessed them to be Garp's. Hey, Garp. Then another pair of shoes came into view. This person was wearing sandals. Riku furrowed her brows a bit. Chaki doesn't wear sandals, she mumbles to herself and looks up. There she finds Haruhi smiling brightly at her. Oni-san. Riku looks next to Haruhi and sees a luggage. Haruhi sees her staring. That's not mine, she says. Huh? You're not coming with? Riku could feel panic starting to rise slightly in her. She had just met her sister that she doesn't remember and now she's leaving. She shakes her head slowly. This is your stuff, you left it at the inn. Oh. Riku then rubs the back of her head as if embarrassed. Sorry for having you bring it out here for me. Riku tries to calm herself by saying that it's better this way. This way, Haruhi won't get hurt or be in danger. Riku then moves to grab the luggage and bring it onto the ship, but Garp grabs it before her. I'll take it, you should talk while you can. He says to Riku, and then turns to Haruhi. It was nice seeing you again, Yuki-san. Riku had a dumbfounded look on her face as she watched Garp walk onto her ship. But it was wiped away as she felt weight being pushed onto her body. She paused for a moment before hugging her sister back. I'll see you some other time. Haruhi told her, but Riku had this feeling of dread that she might not see her again for a long time. I'll maybe come visit or something, who knows? Her words had slightly calmed the feeling. For sure? Riku couldn't help but ask. Haruhi beams. For sure. She then laughs, but it's cut off quickly as she reminds herself of something and digs through her pockets. Here. She hands a letter over to Riku, who carefully picks it up. Riku moves her fingers to open it, but her sister stops her. Don't open it yet. Wait until you're out at sea. Riku can only nod in understanding. A marine comes down from Garp's ship. Commodore, we're ready. He states. All right. Let's get going then. Riku tells him as they both make their way to a ship. As the anchors are pulled in and the ship is swept by the wind and sea, she looks at her sister and waves. See you soon. Haruhi waves back. Have fun, and be careful, soon enough. They're turning the bend of Water 7 and are headed towards a different part of the island. Riku jumps over onto Garp's ship. Is it all right if Chaki and I go on ahead and patrol the islands nearby? She told me she never got to finish. Garp looks at her for a second, then nods. All right, just be careful. Yeah, I got it. You don't have to try and be my sister. She says, then laughs at herself. As it slows, she looks at Garp, who has a serious face on. She knows he's got a question, though he doesn't want to ask for many reasons. She quietly tells him, hoping it's what he wants to hear. I don't remember anything. She then turns to leave. She notices Aokiji on his ship and gives him a slight nod before jumping back onto her ship. Chaki greets her on deck. Shall we go? Though Riku is silent, she says nothing and nods. Chaki then shouts orders to the men and their ship starts to turn in a different direction than Garp's. Riku walks to the side of the ship near the back so she could watch. The Strafats have gotten themselves a beautiful large new ship which Garp has started throwing cannonballs at. She watched and couldn't help but secretly want the Straw Hat crew to make it out alive. She moved closer to the railing and heard a shuffling of paper and fabric rubbing together. Digging her hands into her pocket, she pulled out the envelope. Her carefully pulled the top open and placed her hand inside to find what was inside. Her fingers grazed a smooth surface and she slowly pulled it out. She held the shiny clean picture in one hand and studied it. On the picture, there was 3 little boys and a girl. Riku's ear had twitched uncertainly. She turned her head in a specific direction that seemed to have caught her attention and saw a little dot in the horizon. "What is it?" Chaki asked when she noticed Riku wasn't paying attention. "What's the closest island to Water 7? Chaki thought about it for a while before a marine soldier who overheard them brought a clipboard over to Chaki, who gladly took it. "We're headed for Banero Island next." Banero Island. Riku tested the word out. She walked towards the cabin door. "I'm going to get a little bit more rest. Come get me once we land." As she slowly made her way to her office, she couldn't help but sense an odd feeling. Everything felt quiet, as if there was no one on board with her, yet there were many soldiers. Her mind slowly drifted to the Straw Hat crew. She shook her head and silently cursed as she sat down, trying to drive the thought away. Though they kept coming back, the sound of their yelling on board the Going Merry, along with the captains laughing, even their faces came up, and she soon enough fell asleep to the rocking of the Going Merry. Her nose had wiggled at the smell of fire and her ears caught the sound of trampling feet. She pushed her face off of the desk and sat up, rubbing her eyes. Her clothes were wrinkled, though she wasn't in the marine uniform. "Everyone, get onto the ship. Do not panic." She could barely hear Chaki's voice over the sound of people running onto her ship. She got out and saw many people on her ship. While wondering what all the commotion was, she pushed her way to Chaki. "What's going on?" she shouted when she at last had reached Chaki. "The townspeople are running from a group of pirates that started fighting." Chaki had stopped explaining as she stared wide-eyed at a large shadow that was spread out under the town. Everyone had held their breaths while staring, waiting for what was to come next. Soon enough, the buildings had all cracked and started breaking, falling into the deep depths of the unknown. Another moment of silence and the town came out from another dark pit that was above the original area, though the town came back in ruins as if a giant had stomped through. A man that had a bow strapped to his back had spoken out of loss. "The town's completely destroyed." He turned to Chaki and Riku. "Hey, you're Marines, right? Why don't you do something?" Chaki had already figured out that it was almost impossible. "I'm sorry, but," she couldn't find the right words. "That power." She seemed stunned, almost terrified of going up against something so frightening, powerful, dark. He had fallen to his knees, lost in a deep hole of jumbled emotion. Riku's lips had tightened into a thin line. "Chaki, give me your gun, and all your bullets." Chaki looked at her in confusion, then with a worried look. "You can't possibly think of going in there?" Riku calmly ignored her and ordered the closest marine that was struck with fear. "You, get me all the kairoseki we have." Just as she was about to step off the ship, something blocked her way. She looked down and saw a bow. As she followed the hand that held it, it led to the man. With no words exchanged between them, she took it and strapped it around her. After the marine came back with a box of kairoseki, she bent down and opened the lid. Inside were several handcuffs and some boxes that held bullets. She took some cuffs and placed them into her overly sized pockets. The pocket had sagged little due to the heavy weight. She turned back to everyone on the ship. "No one follow, Chaki, you're in charge." None of the Marines looked like they wanted to follow, but she saw some whispering things and giving her a confident look. She ran off the ship and turned when she noticed something being thrown at her. She caught it. It was Chaki's gun along with a heavy box of kairoseki bullets, though when she looked back, Chaki was already gone. She smirked and ran off towards the demolished town. By the time she made it to the center of the town where all the commotion was happening, there was powerful energy concentrated from 2 devil fruits that were going to soon be released. "Damn, am I already too late?" she muttered to herself, her self-esteem lowering slightly. She shook her head. "No, I made it, just in time." Before anything could happen with the 2 logia's power, she shot 2 bullets both at the dominant arms of the users. Luckily they hit their mark and the power immediately dispersed. "I actually did not think that would work," she told herself. The 2 shot back in pain, holding their now bleeding arms. "What?" Riku tensed slightly as they hissed the word, though rather than looking towards her, they looked towards each other. "What'd you do?" Both then started attacking each other, destroying the rubble of the town. Riku, with a slightly angry expression, ran and jumped, shooting at the area around their feet. This stopped them and caught their attention. The 2 devil fruit users looked at her as she landed, her back facing towards them. The larger of the 2 looked at her angrily and brought his hand up, darkness forming around it. Riku could already feel herself being pulled slowly towards it. "Who are you?" He threatened her by adding more power to the darkness. her feet now slowly making a dragging trail in the dirt road. Still, she did not answer, and the darkness pulled her faster. She quickly turned around, the bow in hand along with an arrow knocked and the string pulled back. Just a passing marine, she plainly said as she let the string go. The arrow had missed its mark sadly, and hit him in the leg. He fell to his knees in pain, while heaving he questioned, "Why?" Riku, not getting what he was meaning, turned to the other user. He looked at her peculiarly, studying her face, as if memorizing it. She brought the bow up with another arrow. Though before she could shoot, he shot a fireball, burning the bow. She dropped it and hissed slightly. She whipped out the gun and aimed it at his head, her finger on the trigger as she was ready to pull back. Except one word had caught her off guard. He looked to the floor and mumbled to himself, "Riku," yet she still heard it. She lowered the gun a little, her eyes peaked with curiosity. "What did you say?" He looked back up with surprise, though the surprise flicked into a glare that was directed behind her. She turned around, but was not fast enough. A punch was aimed for her head. As it hit, everything blurred and her eyes swirled around her as she flew back and tried to regain focus. Once she did, she noticed that someone had caught her. She looked back to find the other pirate holding her up. She pushed him away and stumbled off to the side. The pirate that helped her went to attack the pirate who used darkness. They seemed evenly matched in her mind, though her mind was elsewhere. His face, she recognized it, just barely. Where has she seen him? Outside of her world in Marine headquarters. She knows more people than she ever thought she would. Finally it comes to her, Fire Fist Ace. Rather than answering the question, it just brought more up. Mainly, why did he help her? She figured the only way was to ask him herself. Something shining had caught her eye, and she squinted as she studied the source. The other pirate was using his darkness to drag Ace in again. This time Ace was running out of energy. He grabbed Ace, nullifying his devil fruit powers. Riku grabbed the gun that was laying a few feet from her and shot the bullet at him. His cheek started to bleed from where it grazed. He then dropped Ace and walked over to her. He laughed at her. "Why are you helping him?" "I'm not." She stood up. "I'm helping the townspeople," she stated, lifting the gun again. "Give it up." He laughed again. "You sure have guts. Now tell me your secret. How is it that you can hurt a logia like me with an arrow?" She smirked. He still didn't know. "You really want to know? I'm sure you know of Kairoseki." She lifted a bullet for him to see. "Zhahaha. You're a smart one. How about you join my crew tour for the deal?" She took this opportunity. "How about not?" She pulled out a pair of Kairoseki handcuffs and instantly cuffed a wrist, catching him off guard. He tried to grab her with his other free arm, but she ducked and took the other half and latched it around a dusty silver chain. When he pulled on the wrist, the rest of the chain pulled up from the sandy grounds leading to one of the large broken-down buildings. She slowly backed away, praising her handiwork. She looked left towards Firefist and saw him struggling to stand. When he made it to his feet, he limped towards the handcuffed pirate. "Teach, I'll pay you back for what you did." Though before he could reach him he collapsed to the ground. He was still barely conscious. Everything was silent. Riku stepped towards the man known as Teach, ready to arrest him before she heard voices coming up. "Captain, what happened?" If she already had problems with their captain, she had a feeling his crew would be strong as well. She bent down next to Firefist and placed his arm around her shoulder. He looked at her, tired, yet surprised. "Wah?" he was about to ask, but she shushed him. Though he didn't listen. Blackbeard, I can't turn back." She kept trying to quiet him as they walked towards the ship. He soon fell unconscious and Riku stumbled under his weight. Her eyes had widened. "Holy, what does he eat?" she whispered to herself. She turned back to where she could hear Blackbeard's voice along with his crew members. "Captain, where did Firefist go?" one of them had asked. Luckily for her, the wind had kicked in not too long ago, stirring up loose dirt and sand, blocking everyone's vision. Riku didn't care where she was going though. All she knew was to go the opposite direction of Blackbeard's crew. "Leave him. First get me out of these handcuffs." Riku checked her pockets and sighed in relief. She never took any keys to begin with. As she kept walking while dragging along the body of Firefist, she soon came across the ocean. "Let's just hope that they can't get the cuffs off," she told herself, as she decided to head right and follow the coastline. In the end, she didn't find her ship, but she found a small one-man raft that stood on the sand. She dropped the body on the ground to take a closer look. She found that there was no ore and was disappointed to see that it was specially made. She looked down at the unconscious pirate behind her and an idea soon struck her. She placed him sitting in the boat awkwardly and pushed it into the sea. She quickly rolled up her pants and waded into the water, making sure she wasn't too far ashore, yet too deep, and then she pushed the boat through the water. It glided easily, and she smirked, seemingly satisfied. "Hey Riku. You can't be serious," Chaki had yelled outside of the medical room. "Well, it's the least I can do. He kind of helped me, in a way." Riku tried to avoid Chaki's gaze. When Riku had come back, night was approaching and the sun was setting. All of the soldiers and townspeople were relieved, though it was short-lived when they saw an unconscious Fire Fist being hauled behind her. She told them not to worry and let them go back to town, sending some Marines with them just in case Blackbeard's crew was still there. While she dragged Ace to the infirmary, she made sure to talk with the doctor herself, telling him to fix him up as best he could. When he almost refused, she sent him a quick glare and was on her way. Though Chaki stopped her when she stepped outside the room. "Just because he helped you, doesn't mean we should let him go. We could take him to Impel Down and you could get a promotion." Riku instantly shot down the idea. "I don't need a promotion," she then continued. "Besides, once he wakes up, we'll tell him to be on his way." She trailed off, thinking about how she could ask him how he knows her without grabbing Chaki's attention. Chaki sighed, frustrated that she couldn't change the stubborn Commodore's mind, and she turned around and left to let off some steam. Riku too sighed and walked down to her office. She was met with a bundle of paperwork that she had to fill out based on Bonero Island and what had occurred today. Once she finished that last paper, she dropped her head and slept. Into a deeper, reassuring sleep, she forgot about all her worries. The next morning, her sleep had refreshed her, though a little, so much that she forgot she had a pirate on her ship. She awoke with a brilliant smile and changed into a red t-shirt with a splash of black on the front, with dark blue jeans ripped on one knee, and threw on a black baseball cap over her long, dark, uncombed hair. She swung open the door, ready for another day of sailing. Her crew members greeted her and she gave a cheery, "Good morning," back. It caused some of them to stop for a while before chuckling and getting back to work. "All right, men. We're going to ready to set sail, all right?" She was met with a loud cheer. As she saw some boxes being loaded onto the ship, she went over to the man who was in charge. "What's all of this?" she asked. "Oh, Commodore. Good morning. It's some food supplies given by the people." Riku had frowned slightly at what she heard. "See, Commodore. Have some men take half of the supplies back, and tell the people we don't need it," she ordered. "Yes, ma'am." He saluted as he re-shouted her order to the group of men. A small Marine came stumbling onto the ship with a heavy box onto the ship. She went over and helped steadying him before trying to take the box herself. "No need, Commodore." He tried to carry it himself, but it slipped slightly and Riku had caught it. She smirked. "No worries, I got this one." She heard some of the other Marines muffling a laugh. "Hey, no laughing, we have work to do." Obviously the small Marine was flustered, but he let it go and went back to get more. She quickly made her way to the storage room and set the box down. When she stepped out, a cool breeze had whipped through and the clouds had moved out of the sun's brilliant rays. Covering her eyes, she looked up at those who were working on the sails. "How's it going up there?" she shouted. One of them gave her thumbs up, though lost his balance. Riku panicked from the ground, though when he recovered, she was instantly relieved. "You're up early." Chaki came up next to her with 2 mugs which had steam coming out of the mugs. Riku shook her head. "No thanks." Chaki handed her the mug anyway. "No worries, it's just hot chocolate. A little sugar might help you out." Taking a sip, Riku's shoulders had relaxed a little. "So are you still going to let him go?" Chaki asked again. A confused look had crossed Riku's face. "Who?" "You know, the pirate." Just as Chaki said that, loud scuffling could be heard coming from the storage. They both looked towards the door behind them and out jumped Portgas d'Ace, freshly renewed, and on the run with some of the ship's food supplies. "What?" Riku's eyes had widened. He stopped in the middle of the deck looking for an escape route, though his eyes landed on Riku, who he just passed a few seconds ago. "Crap. I forgot to put Kairoseki handcuffs on him." Chaki ignored Riku's side comment and pulled out a gun from her uniform. She shot at him, though he easily evaded the bullet. The Marines who saw what was happening quickly went and grabbed weapons and surrounded him. "Stop!" Riku had yelled, though it was already too late and a battle was unfolded onto her ship. Though it was more one-sided as Ace had the upper hand with his devil fruit. "Riku," Chaki warned her, though Riku put her mug down and ran into all the commotion and flung a punch at Ace. He caught her fist and studied her face, recognition flooding his eyes. He pushed her back as a sword was aimed for him and he dodged it. "Cease!" Chaki's voice had sounded over all of them. She knew Riku's crew wasn't up for a fight with Whitebeard's 2nd Division commander. She threw him an orange hat that she had in her hand. "We'll allow you to quietly leave the ship." He caught it with one hand while his other hand still had the bag of food he had stolen. He took a glimpse at it before putting it on, and it shadowed his face. Riku saw him smirk before looking at her. "All right," he finally said. Then he slowly started walking. He walked past a few Marines who tensed slightly, and then he walked past Riku. Though not even an inch past her, his arm shot backwards throwing Riku over his shoulder. Panic is written across her face along with everyone else's. "Let go!" She punched his back several times before trying to shove his head away, though he was still too strong, even with one arm. He ran and jumped off the ship as the Marines started shooting at him. While still holding Riku, the two landed in his striker, which he powered up and sped out. Chaki, who was worried that Riku would get shot, shouted the order to stop. She ran over to the edge of the ship and waved her fist angrily. "Cheap bastard, get back here!" She turned to the crew. After him. Though to Chaki's dismay though, after a few minutes of pursuing, it could be seen clearly that the striker was much faster than a Marine ship and he had gotten away. All the while, Riku was fighting back, and as she slowly stopped punching, she finally realized something and stopped hitting and struggling altogether. Her eyes had widened and memories flooded back of her first meeting with the Straw Hat crew. No way. Not again? Ace's mind had finally started working. Why did he take her? Of course her face caught him off guard, but there was just no way. Perhaps she just happened to look like her, that's all. There are people in the Grand Line like that after all. Was he using her for a hostage? No, he was Fire Fist Ace for crying out loud. He didn't need hostages. So why did he take her? He craned his neck to look at the girl that was swung over his shoulder like a bag of potatoes. She had stopped struggling once her ship wasn't in sight anymore. Adjusting her on his shoulder, he turned his head back forward and checked the area, making sure they hadn't followed. After a few minutes though, she had finally spoken. "Could you put me down?" "Huh?" His thoughts were broken by the sound of her voice. "Oh. Sorry, but this is a one-man boat." There was no place to sit on his striker, unless she wanted to sit at his feet in the flames of his devil fruit. He might have placed her on the back with the mast, but worried that she would jump off and try to swim away, he didn't. As if reading his mind, Riku asked, "Could I at least hang onto the mast?" Ace quickly came up with an excuse. "No, because it might break." "You calling me fat?" A surprised look had crossed his face. "What? No, you're really light." No one said a word after that. Until miles later of traveling the ocean, Riku spoke up again. "I remind you of someone?" The flames that powered the striker slowly started fading before the raft finally came to a complete stop. Taking his other arm, he lifted her off his shoulder, moved to the front a little and set her down in the back. He released a breath of air before speaking. "Yeah." A bubble of awkwardness seemed to surround them. What are you supposed to say to someone you think you know but is not sure? Riku sat down, her back leaning against the mast. "My name is Riku." She introduced herself. "I'm sure you used to know of someone with this name and face." Startled at her words, he nodded. She sighed as she saw he wasn't going to talk, and then laughed slightly as this event was different from her previous. He looked at her with a somewhat confused look. "Sorry, I was just thinking about how this is way different from my encounter with Luffy, Straw Hat." "Huh? You met Luffy?" he asked, in which she nodded with a smile, happy she finally got something decent out of him. Might as well try and converse with him, she thought to herself. "I met him on Dia Island, and without knowing it, he was screaming my name and taking me from my own ship." She made it sound casual, almost as if it's an everyday thing. He smirked, knowing his brother. "Of course. It's natural, if I saw your face I would have called out to you and brought you back to my ship." Riku couldn't help but laugh at that statement. "First of all, I'm sure the Mobi is Whitebeard's ship, not yours, and second, you already did." Though rather than a ship, it's a raft. A very well-built raft at that, he corrected for her. Yes, a very well-built raft. She knocked on the area next to where she was sitting. She let her laughter die down a little before asking, I have a favor to ask of you. His smirk seemed to falter a little. Sure, what is it? She cast her eyes downward for a second before looking back up. Could you tell me about the Riku you know? He rubbed his chin with one of his hands and looked at the horizon while thinking. Only if you tell me more about what happened with Luffy. She nodded and then proceeded to tell him everything that has happened with Luffy until this point in time. Wait, Haruhi's here? In the Grand Line? He stopped her in the middle of when she was telling about how she met Haruhi. Huh? Yeah, why? Riku was slightly confused. He shook his head. It's really nothing, but I never expected her to make it this far on her own. He smiled at a thought and then asked her to continue. She went through what happened on Eni's lobby and the Going Merry. Then Garp came and he let us leave to patrol the islands nearby. We headed towards Bonero Island, which is where I ended up meeting you, she finally stated. Garp, huh? He seemed to be reminiscing a lot before finally coming back to reality by Riku's voice. Now it's time to hold up your end of the deal, Fire Fist, she said sternly. He looked at her and thought, he didn't really want to talk about her past. He didn't know for sure if it was really her at all. That would mean he'd be giving information about her to a random stranger. Taking a closer look though, he noticed something peculiar about her. A small laugh escaped his lips. You're like her in so many ways, yet there's no way you can be her. He paused and Riku expected him to decline telling her, though he spoke up again. So, what do you want to know? She paused for a long while, her head looking to the floor, thinking where she should start, what she wants to know and uncover. Her mind was jumbled with thoughts on what her past life could be. What if she hated it? Did she want to know? Ace caught her long hesitation and decided to help her out. Would you like to know her relationship to Luffy, Haruhi, and I? He asked. She looked up at him and nodded. Well, first off, we lived on an island known as Dawn Island in the East Blue. He then pulled out a map from his bag. Luffy and I lived on Mount Corvo. He pointed then moved his finger to a different location, while Haruhi and you lived here somewhere near the base. Riku could tell he hesitated to say her name, though she decided not to bring it up. How come there's no town on the map of where we live? She had noticed a Fuchsia village on the map, but that was nowhere near where Ace was pointing. You and Haruhi didn't live in a town. She gave him a questioning look. You guys lived in an old rundown shrine. You're kidding, she said with an unconvinced look. He laughed at her expression. That's the way you worded it yourself. He stopped laughing abruptly as he noticed what he had said. He wasn't convinced it was her, yet his mind said different. He looked at her to see her reaction. She just watched him for a second before she gave him a friendly smile which he couldn't help but return. Why would my parents choose a shrine? She asked finally. I don't really know, but I think Haruhi said it was really important to them. I believe it was a family business thing. Wondering how run down the shrine was, she asked, have you ever been there? She stared at him for the answer. He nodded, maybe once or twice, but that's all I really remember. Riku was going to ask why, but decided there were more important questions that needed answering first. What about my parents? What were they like? Ace didn't have to think for his answer on this one. Sorry, I didn't meet them. You're going to have to ask Haruhi about that next time you see her. Though his tone of voice seemed to change as he told her to ask Haruhi. She had let some of the others slide, but she wouldn't let this one. She didn't even know when she'd get to see Haruhi again. How'd they die? He was clearly surprised she had asked that question as he jumped back somewhat. In the end, his shoulders slumped forward and he answered. Illness. He looked forward to see her face, though there was no expression on it. Riku thought hard about what her parents could have looked and acted like. She always thought of them to be nice and friendly yet also strong and confident at the same time. She tried to think about what Mount Corvo and what the shrine looked like, yet she couldn't stir a single image. There was nothing except a small hint of recognition in the names. She noticed Fire Fist was staring at her with a somewhat worried expression. I'm fine, and it's just, I want to say that I remember it, but I don't. She sighed in frustration. He gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry. If you're really her, then you'll remember soon enough. She watched him as if in disbelief before her mouth slightly curved up into a smile. All right. What else is there to tell? Looked to the sky and thought with his hand holding his chin. You know what? He turned his face back to her at the sound of her voice. Don't tell me anything. This time, it was his turn to be shocked. It's as you said. If I'm really her, then I will remember. She curled her hand into a fist and looked down at her bare arm. This blood that courses through my veins, it's mine. And that's all that should matter. She looked back at him. As they say, live in the present, not the past, right? Ace looked very uneasy. All right, he said as he tried to smile back. It felt though his silence enveloped the air around them. Are you really sure about this? His smile curving downwards just a bit. Not entirely, Riku said, though her voice soon dimmed down to a whisper, but it's the light of hope that lets me believe I am who I am and the name that reflects upon it. Suddenly, Ace put a hand on her shoulder unexpectedly, her eyes darting up at him. Well said. His mouth quirked in an unusual smile as if trying to hold something in, though unable to hold it in her burst out laughing. Wah! She shouted with a slightly flustered expression. He held his stomach as he bent over laughing. I am sorry, it's just that. Your face, he then immaturely pointed his finger at her. You got a problem with my face? Although it looked just like an old friend, she really wasn't in the mood for this, especially after that calm talk, yet inside she couldn't lie. There was that warm feeling building up in the pit of her stomach. So, just a question, are we lost? Riku asked with a small smirk on her face. No, Ace nervously said, as she raised an eyebrow at his answer. She sat there watching him string curses under his breath before everything went quiet. She decided to push him just a little further. Where's your log pose? She held down her smile that wanted to show. Ace looked as if he was going to scream, but he held it down. Alright, we're lost. I think I left the pose on your ship when I busted out. Ahahaha. Riku broke out laughing while holding her stomach. I never thought the mighty Fire Fist was going to ever admit it, he's lost. What are you laughing at? Is there a problem with being lost? People get lost all the time. Riku paused for a second thinking about this before bursting out again. Ahahaha. No way. Once in a while is fine B, but all the time, ahaha. Why you've gotta be like a specific bee booger to do that? Ace couldn't reply to that, only an eyebrow twitched after she said that. After her laughter died down, she held out something in her hand. He was surprised to find out that what she had was his log pose, and before he could accuse her of stealing she explained. Chaki wanted to confiscate it so that you'd get lost on the ocean and die. She smiled while saying it casually. He snatched it away from her and placed it on his wrist and started powering the striker towards the next island. Throughout the way, they talked about many different kinds of things. Riku was mostly intrigued with the adventure stories Ace told her. In return, she told him things about what she had done while on Marine HQ. What's your favorite song? Ace had asked her in their little game of 20 questions. She looked up to the sky and none? I haven't really had time to listen to a lot of music. What's your favorite color? He laughed a little. Cliché much? I'd have to say red and orange. How about you? None again? She scratched the back of her head in embarrassment. Ace creased his eyebrows slightly. I think you've only replied with none. Nah, she argued. Alright, what's your favorite animal? He tried and smirked when he saw her flinch at the question and her looking about the ship for anything to help her. Huh? Gotcha ya. A prickle of sweat had formed on her forehead. Our reindeer, she shouted. You only said that because of the one on Luffy's crew. He figured out quickly as he remembered meeting Chopper in Alabasta. Shut up. Well then, how about you? What's your favorite animal? AAP Phoenix. Huh. Phoenixes are mythical creatures. Not animals. Riku had quickly pulled out the facts in hopes of crushing Ace with it. Phoenixes are known as birds, and birds are animals. Ace explained to her, the heated argument now getting high. Police. She placed a hand out to face him and turned her head away. The gesture of don't talk. You only said that because he's one of your nakama aboard Whitebeard's ship. The 1st Division Commander Marco. Riku pointed her finger in accusation and was satisfied with the research she did back at HQ on Whitebeard's crew. Nah. Ace had denied. Unless, she trailed off in thought before quickly turning her head away, a red blush appearing over her face. I didn't know you rolled that way, Fire Fist. She turned back and bowed deeply. Please, forgive my rudeness. I'm not gay. After Ace had shouted that, a A small fishing boat had slowly drifted by. The fisherman just watched them pass as his boat headed for the island that was now on the horizon and in sight. Ace quickly enlarged his flames as Riku moved further back on the striker while hanging onto the mast. The duo passed the fisherman. Apparently he's not gay. So we're okay, Riku shouted as they went by. The fisherman didn't say anything back. It was either that or they were already too far to hear what he had to say. You didn't need to tell him that, Ace stated with a sigh. Well, you shouted that you weren't gay, but denial is the first key. So with me as a witness that you are not gay, I can tell people and they'll believe me. Of course her explanation didn't make sense as she thought of it on spot. Riku just felt like shouting it to the man for no reason. Ace sighed again. Whatever floats your boat. As Ace moved his boat near the dock, Riku jumped off to Ace's protest and he watched her thinking she would run away. But she didn't. She just stood there waiting for him patiently as he tied the striker to the side. The area near the port was dead, while as they made their way further inland they saw more people as well as the change in pavement. From the wooden docks to the stone pavement, and bustling town stands and shops were set up all throughout the main road that was being untraveled. Alright, so now what? Riku asked seeing as she was in a good mood and was wondering what was going on next. She knew that it was quite unfair that she was being nice to Fire Fist and cold towards Straw Hat. But Fire Fist just seemed to have a more mature atmosphere around him and he seemed easier to talk to, somewhat, even if they got into a few fights. She looked over to him when she sensed he wasn't next to her anymore. Don't fall asleep in the middle of the road. Ace was harshly awoken with a punch to the head. Ouch. What was that for? She just huffed as he remembered her question. He'd lost track of Blackbeard again, and not only that, but he's kidnapped the commodore of a ship and is stuck with her. Or I could dump her on this island and leave. He thought to himself, though seeing as she didn't really care she was hanging out with a pirate he decided to stick around. First I'm going to need to restock on food. The stuff that I stole wouldn't last me too long. Riku had a confused look cross her face. Me? She asked in a small voice, so small that Ace didn't hear it. What? Did you say something? He saw the look that crossed her face. Never mind, it's nothing. She shook her head. Let's just go into town and see if I can get a hold of anyone to come pick me up. Ace was slightly surprised at her statement but nodded anyways. The two stopped at the nearest merchant. It was an old lady selling homemade soaps. Excuse me miss? Riku asked politely. The old lady turned her head as she heard the voice was directed towards her. Yes? May I help you? Would you mind telling us what island we're on? You're travelers, aren't you? Pirates I'd say. No? She paused and waited for an answer. At the soaps and smelling them brought high head up and answered, yeah. Riku corrected him in his small mistake that he made. If this island didn't enjoy pirates, she didn't want to be caught for being assumed a pirate. I'm actually a marine. The old woman was shocked the two were together. Pirates and marines? I thought I'd never live to see the day. She shook her head with a smile on her face. Riku blushed slightly, not knowing how to take it. We're not together, just working with each other. The old lady grinned. Still, it's a sight to see. Ace opened his mouth to speak but the lady raised her hands and cut him off. I still haven't answered you two's question. Welcome to Pepper Island. Stupid, 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 Riku was screaming as she ran next to Ace down the road. He tilted his head at her. Hey, I know that was a stupid mistake you made back there, but you don't have to beat yourself up about it. She shot him a glare. Oh yeah, she said sarcastically, that little stunt back there just so happened to be caused by me. I somehow managed to burn down an entire inn, and now I am now calling myself stupid. Ace frowned. Well geez. You make it sound so bad, plus you didn't burn the entire thing down, so don't worry about it. Ace was also using sarcasm but wasn't catching on to what she was saying. Baka. I meant you. She bonked him on the head as they ran. Ace took the head with a small wince before rubbing his head and turning to look back at their pursuers. They look really mad. Oh yeah, well maybe cause 550 million belly just slipped through their fingers. Not only that, but their pirate trap was just burned down. Ace thought about it. I guess you're right, but still. You did do as much damage as let's say, oh I don't know, breaking down several walls and doors in the building. Riku turned her head away in slight embarrassment and coughed. Ahem, you did just as much to those poor walls as I. The duo quietly opened the door to the rowdy inn. The girl poked her head in slightly before her companion had given her a light push out of the way and started walking in. She narrowed her eyes at him for a few seconds before hurrying to catch up with him. He went straight for the bartender, his boots thumping on the wooden floorboards loudly. The girl who walked a few steps behind him kept her eyes on his back but carefully watched those who stared at them and whispered. "Could we get a room for two?" Ace stopped at the counter and asked, Riku's foot coming from behind and hitting him square in the back, causing him to double over, slamming his face on the counter. "Could we get 2 single bedrooms?" she corrected for him as she emphasized the separation of the rooms. The bartender nodded and started walking towards a stairway not far from where they stood. Riku noted how he looked. How his face seemed stern and conniving, though she shrugged it off, knowing not to judge a book by its cover. Ace followed first and then Riku, who looked left, then right, noticing that some of the people in the inn were staring at them with greed in their eyes. She followed their gazes and mentally slapped herself for not noticing earlier. They were in an inn full of bounty hunters, and not only that. Ace's white beard mark was like a target on his back. They climbed the stairs to the second floor and were quickly led to their respective rooms right next door to each other's. Ace was given his room key and stepped into his room to take a look around. "I'll give you some privacy," the owner said, and shut the door behind Ace, who kept walking deeper into his room. Next, he led Riku to the next room over and repeated, opening the door and handing her the key. She walked in and instantly noticed how dark it was in the room. She turned on the light switch on the side and noticed how there were no windows in the room, along with no bathroom or closet. "I'll give you some privacy." She turned around at the sound of his voice and saw he was already shutting the door with a victorious smile on his face. Riku ran and her hands slammed on the door just milliseconds after the door clicked shut. She tried for the knob but it wouldn't turn and there was no lock on it. She was locked in from the outside. She pounded on the door with her fist. "Damn it." The bartender was walking back down the hallway with a smirk as he heard the thumping of the pirates in the empty rooms. As he made it to the stairwell, he heard the rushing of feet jogging up the stairs. He nodded to several bounty hunters as they passed him with a smirk and headed towards the rooms, which had gone suspiciously silent. The 6 hunters had split up. 3 stopped at the nearest room holding what they believed to be a white-beard pirate, while the other 3 stood outside the room next door. They turned to each other in understanding and one of them started to whisper, 3, 2. Door-busting kick. Riku shouted to the door. She kicked down, the wood splintering into fragments. At the same time, Ace, who had plans of his own, shot a wave of fire through the door, burning it as it fell. They both stepped out onto shocked bodies of the fallen bounty hunters. Turning to each other, they gave one another a look and a nod before sprinting down the stairs. "God. Frickin'. Mother of. I knew I shouldn't have let you chosen the inn. Just cause the log pose will set in 3 days doesn't mean we have to steep down to a cheap inn," Riku hissed as a bullet whizzed past her ear. When she got no response, she turned her head sideways and noticed Ace wasn't running next to her anymore. "Where?" She whipped her head around and found him standing in front of the mob of bounty hunter. "Heiken. 1. He shouted, throwing his flamed fist towards the enemy. Riku's eyes had widened in realization. "Oh, she ducked and covered her head, though Ace and the enemy were behind her. She worried of flying bodies, possible debris and stray flames. Ace had got his name from his signature attack after all. Riku was glad she hit the ground though, because she saw a few pieces of debris, probably from a stray building in the way, land near her. When she felt the heat start fading from the air, she stood up and dusted off her pants as Ace casually walked towards her. "Man, that was so much easier. Why didn't I think of that before?" Riku sighed. "I don't know. Why didn't ya?" He opened his mouth to answer, but she cut him off. "Don't answer, let's just get out of here before people come to check out what's going on." "We're in the same town, right?" Riku asked as she and Ace walked down a dirt road. The area they were currently in was different from the tiled and clean town they were in not too long ago. The houses were now wooden rather than brick, and the paved roads were now dirt. Some buildings were broken and there were many bars stationed around in which they could hear people in. Pirates were easily noticeable and lounging all around the main road. "I'd say we're just on a different part of the town. Judging by the sun, we had been running west," Ace explained. Then he stretched out his arms upward as if relaxing. "Though I'd rather be here in the pirate population with my people rather than in town with those hunters." Riku never looked in his direction, so you say, but your people aren't all as kind as you, she said, surprising herself as she stopped in her walk next to him. Ace smirked but kept walking. You're saying I'm kind? She quickly caught up next to him and didn't reply for a moment. Yeah, but they're not all as stupid as you either. Great comeback, he said sarcastically with a roll of his eyes, if it was supposed to be one. Riku's eyes cast downward to the ground for a quick second, her cheeks tinted pink slightly. Whatever, she mumbled before bringing her head back up with a calm look. What I'm trying to say though, is that there are some pirates here that I recognize from their posters. Some are even known for their destructive and sadistic ways. She eyed many pirates carefully. I'm surprised nothing has happened to this town yet either. She felt Ace stop next to her and she too stopped and followed his gaze at which he was staring at. There was a group of 5 pirates sitting outside a bar playing cards on barrels. She could see that a few had pink tints on their cheeks and the smell of alcohol had easily invaded her senses. She recognized a man sitting at the little joint to be a captain. His face was recognized, but his name never came to mind. He was a young guy who looked to be in his early 20s. His hair was mid-neck, dark red, and he had unusual steel-gray eyes. He sat casually with an air of arrogance while wearing a wheat brown thin sleeveless jacket and dark blue jeans. If you're so curious they're going to wreak havoc, why don't you ask them yourselves? Ace nudged his head in the same direction in which he pointed his thumb. Riku gave a huff and walked over to the group, Ace following behind, a smirk on his face as he couldn't wait to see how she would deal with them. Hey, Riku barked, you're a pirate, right? Why haven't you attacked this town yet? So blunt. Ace thought in the background with a shocked face. And a bad way to start off when trying to find out information. I better stop her while I can. Eyes slowly moved from the game to slowly look over at her, though she only focused on one pair and stared straight back at the gray ones. He gave her a lazy smile. Are you accusing me of planning an attack on this town just cause I'm a pirate? And even if I was, why would I tell you? Riku gave a feral grin and lifted a fist. You will want to tell me because if you don't, I'm gonna beat the shish pphh, mpph. Ace's hand quickly covered her mouth and pulled her back as she tried to throw punches at the captain. Please forgive her for her rudeness. She doesn't really know how to start a conversation well, especially with pirates. He gave a sheepish smile as he dodged a stray punch headed for his head while still keeping her restrained. The pirate captain looked at Ace and his smile grew as he recognized him. Fire Fist Ace, it's a surprise seeing you here in the first half of the Grand Line. His crewmates stirred a little while Ace still held a smile on his face, though it was a normal one, as if he was ready to accept a challenge if it was requested. The captain looked to the still struggling Riku. Lovely girl you got there. He nodded in her direction. Riku was like a wild beast. She hadn't combed her long hair this morning and getting kidnapped and struggling didn't help make it any better. Her disheveled hair was sticking out everywhere and flying as she struggled in Ace's grip. When she heard him say that, her eyes snapped and met the captain's gaze. She stopped and glared back. Ace lowered his hand from her mouth and allowed her to speak. We're not together. You finally done? Ace smirked and asked as he placed her down when she nodded. All right, then you should apologize for your rude behavior, doll. His smirk grew even wider as he was about to burst out laughing. In response, Riku threw a punch to his gut in which he doubled over. When she brought her fist back up, she let out a puff of air onto her fist. Next time you say that, it's going lower. Ace let out a chuckle as he held his stomach in both hands before standing straight again. There was a loud sound of laughter next to them. If anything, she's much more like a beast than a doll, Fire Fist. Do you want to get kicked where the sun doesn't shine? She retorted at him, ready to strike. I have a name and it's Riku. Ace stepped up and tried to calm her. Riku. Hey, calm down, it's no big. Your name is kind of a girly name, isn't it? A young boy in a straw hat at the age of 7 asked. That's because I am a girl. A girl with dark brown hair reaching just past her neck said with irritation while giving him a whack on the head. Don't tell me you're just figuring that out now? She said with a shocked face. She. He gave a laugh while rubbing the spot she hit him, even though it didn't hurt his rubber body at all. Another boy came up to the two. He had a large top hat on his short curled blonde hair, and when he spoke, the 2 other kids were easily able to see the gap in his teeth. Come on, Luffy, it shouldn't have been that hard to tell. He walked closer to the girl and pinched her cheek. Look, she still has baby fat on her. When he let go, the girl rubbed her cheek. Sabo, don't be such a hypocrite. Just because you and Ace are 3 years older than me and Luffy doesn't mean you don't have baby fat anymore. Plus, what's that gotta do with me being a girl? Sabo ignored her and continued on. He gently grabbed a lock of her hair and held it out for Luffy to see. Her hair is longer than a usual boy's haircut and it's much smoother and shinier. He dropped it and let it fall back to its place. Though her voice is lower than a normal girl's. I'm not normal, girl, came the shocked response. Hey, my voice isn't that low. It's still higher than a regular boy's voice. Clap, clap, clap. The sound of Luffy's clapping was heard as he gave an ooh. Sabo took the praise and bowed. Sabo, Luffy, stop appraising that doll and let's get a move on. A third boy 10 years old sitting on a tree stump with a smile said. His hair was also black, and though he had no hat on, he did have freckles. Ace, you're back, Luffy shouted happily. When did you get back? Ace was off giving the area around them a quick patrol while he told the other 3 to stay back. He came back just as Luffy told her how girly her name sounded and sat down at the stump listening in on the conversation. Of course, Sabo noticed Ace, who was holding his laughter in there right away but continued to teach Luffy in telling girls and boys apart. When the subject started falling, Ace decided that was as good as it was going to get and decided to butt in. The girl snapped around with an angry face. Don't call me that. You want to get kicked where the sun doesn't shine. Sabo and Luffy paled a little at her words while Ace accepted the challenge as he got into a fighting stance. Just let me see you try. Ace, maybe you shouldn't. That sounds really painful. Sabo tried to reason with him. Luffy shot up from where was shocked and sitting on the floor. She's not a doll or a girl. Everyone stared at him as if he was crazy. She's a beast. A shocked look came across the girl and took control as the boys broke into a laugh. She, came Luffy's laugh. She's a she no Yuki, too. The look of shock on the girl had finally broken. Oi, Luffy, don't go mixing my surname with your laugh to come up with such a weird name. And how many times have I told you to call me by my first name? The laughter from the boys was starting to die down, though it was easy enough to see through the hiccups and tears that they needed to laugh some more. Huh? But your first name is too girly. A tick mark appeared on her forehead. That's the point. 'Cause I'm a girl. She breathed in deeply to calm herself and turned to Sabo and Ace, who have resumed laughing. Come on you guys, help me out. Sorry, but we can't help you out here. Sabo managed out in between breathes. Luffy patted her back and gave her a smile. Plus, she no Yuki sounds way more cooler. It was easy enough to see how excited he was through the eyes that were shining like sparkles. The girl's look fell and she turned to Ace, though deadpanned as she knew he already wasn't going to help. What are you giving me that L look for? I can't help either, but she no Yuki sounds way cooler. Ha ha ha, he continued to laugh. She left a somewhat irritated yet amused look on her face as she waited for the laughter to finally die down. When it did, Sabo spoke first while wiping a stray tear from his eye. You might as well go and change your name while you can. The girl huffed and thought about it. Finally something clicked in her head and she smirked. Fine, then call me Riku. Ace? A curious voice snapped him out of his thoughts. He blinked. Huh? What? Blinking again, he saw Riku standing in front of him with a curious and somewhat worried look. You were about to say something but you blanked off, she explained and took a step back as he came back to his senses. You sure you're okay? He gave a reassuring smile. Yeah, sorry about that. I just had a nostalgic feeling, his voice diming down as if he himself was unsure of it all. Hey, don't give me that look. He stuttered as he noticed Riku hum and give an unapproved, I don't believe you, look. She turned back to the pirate captain. Whatever, she mumbled and looked to the redhead that was silently and patiently waiting. Alright Claymore, tell us WHHE pirates here are acting kind of funny, especially you. The captain referred to as Claymore by Riku gave her a questioning look. I don't believe I've ever met you, so how would you know how I act? Though before Riku could answer, Ace also had a question. Claymore? Riku gave Ace a somewhat shocked look. You mean you don't know? Ace grinned and shook his head. Well, I guess he's not that famous to begin with. She placed her chin on her hand as if in a thinking manner. Hey, what did you say? Claymore's pride was easily damaged with Riku's last words. though he was ignored as Riku explained. Perhaps I only know because I've been at HQ too long and it's part of my job to know and recognize different pirates from each other. Ace nodded in understanding. Hey, beastie girl, Claymore shouted to get her attention. Riku stood off to the side of him and faced Ace. She placed her hands up in the manner of introducing the captain. This is Blitz Claymore, Kletos, captain of the Barrage Pirates. He's a rising rookie pirate, though of course not as high as those who are becoming known as the 11 Supernovas. From reports that were sent back from HQ, his main weapon is a claymore and he has a gun on his side for long-distance damage. Kletos couldn't help but smirk at her summary and listened as she continued on. He's known to be quite arrogant and prideful and can be angered easily when provoked. His smirk faded into a frown. Who says I'm easily angered? He shouted in a frustrated and angrily way. Riku once again ignored him and continued on. On another note, some soldiers notice him to be laid back, sometimes becoming an easy target for the Marines. Though a problem is that he's much stronger than he looks, even if he's not a devil fruit user. Ace noted that if Riku had glasses on right now, she would probably be pushing them back up into place from that long summary along with it glinting. She turned back to Kletos, who was semi-glaring and semi-not caring. She did just insult him and compliment him in her whole description after all. Now tell us, what the heck is going on? Why should I tell you? You just insulted me in front of my face, he glowered. Riku muttered something under her breath, only loud enough for Ace to hear. I told you, easily enraged. Ace stepped up this time. Look, we don't mean to bother you, but we just want to be aware of any imposing danger upon us that we need to be aware of. Riku kept a straight face as she thought to herself, where the heck did he learn to be so polite? Whitebeard? Nah. She shook her head at the thought. Kletos was quiet after listening to Ace as if in thought as he studied him. Finally he answered, alright. But I'm only doing this out of respect for Whitebeard and his crew. You have my gratitude. Ace replied as he placed his hand on his hat and gave it a slight nod. Well, to start off, there are Marines on this island, and they've been here for a few weeks already. Kletos started and Riku seemed to perk up at this bit of information. And we know that Marines hate our guts. Riku frowned. Sure, she may dislike pirates, but she doesn't hate them. Then again, as a Marine she's supposed to dislike them. It's what she was taught growing up in HQ. Though sometimes, or most of the times, something just always never seemed to fit right when they were telling her these things. There's no Marine base on this island? Riku questioned. Yeah, I heard that Marines send out different ships once in a while to patrol this island since there has yet to be a base built on it yet. Kletos explained to her as she nodded in understanding. Anyway, you'd think they'd charge in here knowing half the town is overrun with pirates and try to catch us, but the weird part is that they don't. To me it seems as if they're just baiting us, but some others think that they're waiting for us to let our guard down before they strike. But either way, if you're caught, you're as good as a lab rat. That's it. You're pirates who face Marines every day, and yet you guys are all grouped and hiding in half the town from them? Riku was unsettled by this as it wasn't very much. All there was were Marines and pirates like any other island had to go through. Lab rat? Ace asked. He too was distressed by such little info and decided to try and find out more. Kletos nodded. If any pirate is caught, his captain will be asked to turn himself in for the safety of his crew if he cares enough. Though so far, for all the cases that's happened, no captain has turned himself in for a crewmate or his whole crew. Rumor has it that the crew captured or left to be taken back to the scientist Vegapunk and experimented on. Kletos looked away for a second and looked to his crew that had been quietly listening on. That's why most of the pirates, and us included, stay here. I don't want to lose any crew members. He mumbled the last part. Wait a second though. Marines aren't allowed or supposed to bring live experiments to Vegapunk, much less pirates who are supposed to go to Impel Down. That is unless he got permission. And an order was issued by higher-ups, or the higher-ups themselves wanted Vegapunk to experiment for them. If so, the news should have gone to every Marine ship and I should have heard about it. Kletos and his crew gave her a very confused and questioning look. Perhaps it was issued this morning after we left your ship, Ace suggested. Riku's brows furrowed and she looked towards Kletos, though Claymore said that they've already been here for a few weeks, right? He hesitated before nodding. There have already been 12 cases of crewmates getting captured. Is there any other way for Vegapunk to get a hold of people without having to get permission? Ace asked, trying to help. Riku sighed and held her chin with her hand and shut her eyes, thinking. If he was in dire need of bodies, he'd need to go to higher ups to get the overflow, though if he was to get experiments from only one ship. Her eyes flew open as she slammed a fist down onto her other hand. Then that means it must be the Marine Science Unit. Ace's eyes narrowed slightly, and we need to know that. Why? Riku shut her eyes again and tilted her head again. Well, let's see, the person in charge of the science unit is. A repetition of what happened a few seconds ago occurred. Her eyes snapped open. Sentomaru. She quickly turned to Ace. I don't know how Sentomaru will par on fighting level with you, but it's probably best if we keep our distance. He's quite strong and can damage logia users such as yourself. Ace nodded, finally understanding why she was trying to figure out who was in command of the Marines here, and then he also smirked as he realized something else. I'm honored to know that you, a Marine, is worried about my safety. He allowed laughter to escape from his mouth. If anything, I thought you would run to them and ask them to take you back to HQ. Riku turned away from him and huffed. Well, if you really want to know, I still have questions and I still need answers. Also, I'm not on too fond of the science unit. I mean, it's not like they hate me or are mean or anything. There actually are really nice people. It's just, she sighed at her stuttering, never mind. She turned towards Kletos to thank him for the information, but she was met with several swords pointing at her. Her eyes followed the swords to their users, the crew members of the barrage pirates. She looked at their captain, who was frowning deeply in confusion and somewhat anger. You're a Marine. He didn't ask but stated, and his hand automatically reached up to his sword. Riku had nothing to say back, rather, she was in shock. She was lost in the conversation too much that she had totally forgotten the position she and Ace were in. Perhaps Ace wasn't in too bad of a position seeing as he was a pirate, but she was a Marine in pirate territory. Ace stepped in between the two and allowed flames to engulf his fist. If you and your crew want to start a fight, I hope you know what you're getting yourselves into. Back off, Fire Fist. Why are you with a justice freak like her? He snarled. Didn't I already say there have been 12 cases of pirates being tortured by those damn Marines? Riku shrunk back somewhat from his insult, and her state seemed to worsen in her shock. The fire around Ace's fist seemed to brighten in response, and his face showed slight anger. Do you think I'm just gonna stand by and watch as you and your crew try to hurt one of my friends? He snapped back. At his words, Riku seemed to brighten a little as her eyes grew in surprise. A friend, she whispered to herself before letting the comfort of his words finally sink in. Even if she didn't remember him, and even if she may not really be the Riku he once knew, he still thought of her as a friend. Letting a warm smile form across her face, she stepped up next to Ace. It's fine, Ace, she said, startling him, and he looked at her in wonder before also settling with a smile. She then turned to Kletos. All right, Claymore. I don't know what your problem is, scratch that. I know you don't like Marines, but don't go clumping me in with those, as you call, justice freaks. Not all Marines are like that. Got it? She stalked up closer to him, ignoring the swords that were pointing very close to her, and looked down on Kletos, who was still sitting on a barrel with his hand on his claymore. And if you have a problem with me, just being me and not on duty to arrest you, then I suggest you need to get your priorities straightened out and figure out where the real danger is coming from. She then threw her hands up in frustration. It's either me or the frickin' science unit, who does God knows what on their probably bleached clean ship. She let out a heavy sigh. Riku and Ace watched and were closely inspecting Kletos' reaction. His face was shadowed, and to the two it was hard to tell what he was thinking. Finally he looked up and narrowed his eyes. Irritation was written all over his face. Whatever, just get the hell out of here before we become the danger. He growled, causing Riku to tense and curl her fist. Ace turned to leave and Riku followed hesitantly. She looked at him walking next to her and was about to question his actions before noticing the smile on his face. She had thought that Ace would have gladly accepted Kletos' challenge or would have stayed to fight. She herself was ready for a battle, and when he calmly walked away with his back to his enemy, she was confused. You do know that he threatened us, right? He placed his hands behind his head and nodded with a hum in reply. She furrowed her brows. And you didn't find any need or urge to threaten him back? He shook his head with that smile still plastered to his face. No, why, did you? He let out a small laugh. And no, Riku lied, flustered that he had asked such a question. Wasn't she supposed to be the more mature Marine, and him the immature pirate? Truth to be told, she did have a small thought in the back of her brain telling her to threaten him back. It's just, why are you still smiling even after we were threatened? Unexpectedly he laughed out loud, startling her from her walk. He stopped next to her. Why am I smiling, you ask? He kept laughing before finally answering, well, because that's the first time you've called me by my first name. He gave her a cheeky grin. Her mouth hung open agape as she thought back to what had happened. Yeah, she really did call him by his first name, just like Straw Hat. It was accidental. No, when she said their names it was intentional, but it just came smoothly and knowingly as if she had called their names before. She bit her lip and furrowed her brows. What was she supposed to do now? There was no way she could cover up her mistake. She turned her head back to him, but he was already looking ahead at the road, not caring whether or not she was going to comment back. Hey, anyway, we should find an inn to stay in soon. It'll be a night by the time we go back to the other side of town, so we might as well find one here. So, do you want to tell me how it's dawn and we still haven't found a decent place to stay in? Riku asked tiredly as she walked alongside Ace. I think we lost them and, he started, also tiredly. Well, he gave her a cheeky grin in return as he rubbed the back of his head. She let out a long sigh and brought both hands up to her head to hold it. It's alright. There's no need to tell me. I was with you the whole time. She used her hands to turn her head slightly to the left so she could see him. First it was this small snack you were going to have at the neat-looking restaurant. Then it became an all-you-can-eat buffet. And then it became I can't pay for this much, so let's ditch. Ah ha ha ha. But the fun thing was that you were also really into the food. He laughed at her. She let her hands fall back to her sides as she tried to ignore his laughing. Damn, now I know how Chucky feels whenever I do that, she muttered. Lucky girl just never gets caught up in the moment though. She thought about it before her eyes gleamed evilly as she thought back to the time on Dia Island. Hee hee, sometimes, she cackled. Ace abruptly stopped laughing and lifted his face and looked alert. Did you hear that? He asked as he started moving in long swift strides. Riku followed closely behind, questioning his actions. He quickly turned into a maze of alleys. Hey, what's wrong? She whispered as she knew he was trying to listen for something. He didn't answer though and continued to lead them through the maze. Finally, as he got closer to his destination, he slowed down and Riku was able to hear the noise. There was shouting, and it sounded like quite a group. Suddenly Ace stopped, causing Riku to run into his back. Don't stop so suddenly, you have a hard back, she stated while rubbing her nose. He was silent still and Riku peered around his back to look at the scene before them. She quickly took note that they were on the border between the civilian side and the pirate side. A line formed from a dirt road meeting a paved one ran down vertically from where Ace and Riku stood at the mouth of the alley. On one side there were fresh, brick-walled buildings while the other held old, broken wooden ones. A few feet past the border on the paved road was where the commotion was happening. Riku and Ace watched from around the corner, as they saw a group of Marines and a group of pirates. A red-headed man with his back facing the two was kneeling, surrounded by a group of pirates. Though they couldn't see his face, they guessed it to be bleeding, just like his hands and back from cuts and bruises. His dirty wheat brown jacket was in tatters and ripped, blade marks clearly shown on his back. A group of Marines clearly surrounded the group of pirates in their blue and white uniforms. Another group of pirates, about 5, mixed in with the blue and white, stood across from the redhead, while in handcuffs that were chained to one another. They were shouting at each other, but there seemed to be some dissonance going on in the crew. Captain, don't listen to her, we'll be fine, one of the crewmates said. Another, looking as if he was about to cry, thought differently. Captain, save us, I don't want to be experimented on. What do you mean you'll be fine? The captain shouted. He turned to the main Marine who stood in front of him and barked. What do you want? You want me, right? He tightened his bloody fist on the ground, causing more to leak out. Ace and Riku's eyes moved to the Marine as they watched for an answer. The one currently in charge was a girl with medium-length brown hair that was tied into a low ponytail. Her bangs also pulled back except for 2 strands on the sides. She also held a sword in her hand. The Marine woman spoke, making total eye contact with her green eyes. You're right, we do want you. If you want your crew to be free and alive, come to the East Dock unarmed in the afternoon. Riku actually found H and thought she would have been a nice person to hang out with until she sneered her next words. Not that you would anyway. Damn pirates always save their own skin and run with their tail between their legs. Why don't you take me now? I'll give myself up now, the captain said as he struggled to stand up, a crewmate coming to help him. The marine lady gave him an amused smirk. That's very kind of you, but sorry. The scientists on the ship have been getting a little antsy lately and I don't think one captain will be enough for them to experiment on for the time being. She then proceeded to turn and walk away while the other marines retreated with her, while towing the pale and frightened pirates. You bitch! You said you wouldn't do anything to them if I gave myself up, he screamed at her. She stopped in her tracks. I may have said that they'd come out alive, but I didn't say whether they'd be intact or not. She continued on, ignoring the captain's shouting. Riku's fist unknowingly clenched tighter and tighter with every word that she had said and with every step that she took. Her foot pushed off the ground and she subconsciously raised her fist in the direction of the marine woman and she opened her mouth to scream. Though it died in her throat as his hands shot out, covering her mouth and pulling her back. Ace gave her a stern look and she glared at him back before they finally had a mutual agreement and she sighed. She had let the irritation get to her head. The two stood silently and waited until the marines couldn't be seen anymore to step out. When they did, the captain had fallen to his knees and was pounding the ground in frustration. Riku and Ace walked towards the group that had yet to notice them from behind yet. Chink. Everything went silent after that. Riku looked down at what she had accidentally stepped on. It was a claymore. Suddenly she thought about it, red hair, dirty wheat brown sleeveless jacket, a freaking claymore. She looked up and her eyes locked onto gray ones which narrowed at the sight of her. It was Blitz Claymore, Kletos. He stood up again with the help of a crewmate and once he was standing he stumbled over to her quickly with rage in his eyes. Ace was about to step in front of her but she quickly grabbed his wrist and stopped him. She didn't make any movement as Kletos grabbed the collar of her shirt and yanked her upwards. This is all your fault. You told them, didn't you? Now because of you, my crew is going to become dismembered. He shouted at her as his crew started surrounding them to protect their captain if it came. Kletos dropped her to her feet and he kicked his sword off the ground and caught it in his right hand. He took a few steps back before he jumped and aimed to cut off her head. A fist connects to his head before it could hit, and Kletos falls unconscious. Riku turned her head to look at Ace. Great. Now how are we supposed to interrogate him? Ace cracked the knuckles he had punched Kletos with. We'll just wait for him to wake up. He needs to cool down a little anyway. Captain. Someone yelled from the side. The two looked around their surroundings and saw the crew members who weren't caught and taken for dismemberment. The surrounding members all had on furious and tired faces. Not only have they lost their crew to the Marines, but now they think they're going to lose their captain to a Marine and a pirate. Oh great. Riku muttered sarcastically, as she noticed them shifting their weapons in their hands. The first move is made by a barrage pirate. He jumps at Riku with his sword raised. She jumps left to avoid being hit, though a gunshot rings out and a bullet whizzes past her. She looked ahead of her and there was a gunner standing in front of her. Just as she was about to go for a him, another sword user came from her back left corner, and swipes at her. In response, she ducked and kicked him in the chin, knocking him unconscious. Turning back to the gunner, he was already aiming his gun at her, and just as she was about to dodge, the gunner fell from bullets of fire. Riku turned to Ace who was still in the middle of battle, but he met her eyes and tipped his hat with a smirk. Devil fruits sure come in handy, she muttered with a smile, before kneeing the guy that was coming from her front. He better not be dead, she yelled to Ace. I don't think I hit any vital points, so he should be okay, he called back. After the two proceeded to take out the rest of the crew members, they stood on the paved road with unconscious and semi-conscious bodies around them, around 10 to be exact. Alright, so we've managed to knock most of them unconscious. So now what? Riku asked, to which Ace shrugged his shoulders at. She sighed, and caught movement from the corner of her eyes. See Captain. Don't take him. A pirate struggled to stand on his own as well as many others. Riku looked at Ace with a mental question and he did the same. Finally they both sighed, and Ace walked over, bent down to Kletos's ruined and unconscious body and threw him over his shoulder, much to the crew's horror. Riku walked over to the pirate who first spoke, and just as he was just about to fall back to his knees from seeing his captain getting picked up, Riku swiftly placed herself under his arm to help him balance. Could you direct us to the nearest hospital? One that treats pirates such as yourselves? She asked as nicely as she could. He and his comrades had their mouths agape, and he nodded dumbly before walking in the direction with the help of Riku. The other crew members gathered and helped each other walk, and the group of beaten pirates, along with Riku and Ace, trekked west, back onto the dirt road to find a hospital. Outside of the hospital, Riku stood leaning her back against the building as Ace sat criss-crossed on a nearby barrel. Both really had no reason to stay, and were lost in their own thoughts. The sound of a door opening nearby caused the two to look up and see a barrage pirate walk out with a man who looked to be the doctor. He had some severe cuts on his back and it was bleeding pretty badly. We just stitched them and patched up some of the smaller cuts. He should just get plenty of rest and he'll be fine. The doctor said, "You can visit him. Now if you'll excuse me, I have other patients I need to work with." He walked back into the hospital, leaving the barrage pirate with Riku and Ace. Riku and Ace stared at the pirate, who lowered his head as the two gazed at him. He rubbed the back of his short black hair and let out a sheepish laugh before bowing to the two deeply. "Thank you very much." Ace grinned and jumped off from the barrel. "No problem. Now let's go check on your captain." The pirate nodded and started walking back into the hospital with Ace and Riku in tow. They walked into a small wooden hospital room and saw Klito's bed pushed into the far right corner of the room. He was sitting up with several of his crewmates surrounding him with worry, making the room even more smaller and crowded than it needed to be. As Riku and Ace walked closer to the bed with the pirate they walked in with, he started shooing them all out. "Captain needs some space and air, out, out, out," he ushered as he too walked outside with them, shutting the door, and leaving only Ace and Riku in the room with Klitos. Klitos looked at them for a second before slowly averting his eyes away and onto his lap covered by white blankets. "That was the science unit, right? The one you all were trying to avoid by hiding on this side of town?" Riku asked, awkwardly breaking the silence. Klito's hands clenched the blanket suddenly and his knuckles turned white. "So what if it was? It doesn't matter anymore. My life as a pirate is over. Just take me to the ship." He turned and looked Riku straight in the eye with a glare, in which she returned, "I'm not taking you anywhere. Let's go, Fire Fist." She turned to leave the room. Ace watched her, and blinked with a baffled face before turning to look at Klitos and then preparing to follow Riku out. "It was Blackbeard," he said with a whisper, but both Riku and Ace caught it, making them stop in their tracks. Ace's face darkened as he turned back to Klitos. "Did you say Blackbeard?" Klitos looked up at Ace's face, surprised that he recognized the name. "Yeah." To think that Ace started, but Riku knew what he was going to say next and quickly clamped him shut, by slapping her hand over his mouth. "What does Blackbeard have to do with this?" Klitos looked a bit confused, but answered, "We met him on this side of town, things happened, and we got into a fight." Riku bit her lip, knowing what he had faced. His power was overwhelming, and it could easily wipe us out. "I knew that after witnessing him take some of my crew and injuring me in the process." He clutched the blanket again and his face had both anger and sadness on it. "I had decided that we should retreat. We all ran and ended up on the other side of town where—" He paused and slammed his fist down onto the side table, which had a vase with flowers in it. "That damn Marine captured my crew." He turned and gave Riku a cold look. "Now take me to the damn ship," he practically shouted at her. She frowned at him. "I already told you, I'm not taking you anywhere." I told you what you wanted to know. Now hold your end of the deal." "We never made a deal in the first place," Riku stated as a matter of fact and turned to open the door. "Bitch," he cried. Ace looked at Riku and Klitos with an indifferent face, before sighing and turning with Riku to head out the door. Riku turned the knob of the door and as she opened it, whoa, she barely missed getting hit by the crewmates who fell in from leaning against the door. "See, Captain," some of them shouted as they stood up, trying not to look like a fool in front of Klitos. We were worried about you. Just because these two brought you to a hospital doesn't mean we can trust them. Just like you always said, never trust a Marine, no matter how nice they act." The pirate that had accompanied Ace and Riku into the hospital saluted. For some reason, Riku couldn't help but let out a small laugh. "Peef. Ahahaha." The crew and Klitos tilted their heads at her odd behavior. "Must be nice to have such a close crew," she said silently to herself, except Ace managed to catch it and grinned at her words. She started walking out again as the pirates moved themselves out of the doorway. "Wait," Klitos said and pleaded, "I'm begging you, Take me to the marine ship. I want my crew to stay alive. I don't care what happens to me. They're precious friends of mine. She turned her head back at him just so she could see him from the corner of her eye. I already said no, she pronounced with a smile. But he started again, though was cut off. Riku turned fully around to face Kletos and Ace, and crossed her arms. Come on, Ace. We have a science unit to go raid. After Ace and Riku stepped out of the hospital, Ace turned to her. So tell me, why was it again that we didn't let Kletos know that we had a run-in with Blackbeard, and know him as well? Riku started walking to the East Harbor where she guessed the marine ship would be. He hates us already. Probably me more. If he knew that the reason Blackbeard was here in the first place was because of chasing us, then he'd probably gut us. If it wasn't for his coming here, he wouldn't have lost those crew members to him. She stopped suddenly and looked to the ground with a guilty look on her face. Since it's our fault, we need to make up for it. We need to save the rest of his crew. Riku continued to march on determinedly. Still, I'm surprised they managed to catch up to us so fast, Ace stated. It's a mystery, but we can ponder about that later. It was pitch black out, the only light coming from a few street lanterns which allowed the vision of two figures on the docks looking at the large marine ship in front of them. Right, so we're going to sneak aboard, free the crew and get out as silently as possible. Riku whispered to Ace. Right. And we're not busting in with flames because, Ace asked casually. Because chances are highly likely they have sea stone handcuffs or something of the sort on their ship, and once they get that on you, it's all over, she whispered harshly. Ace looked down at her crouching form. You know you don't have to whisper, it's not like they're going to hear us. And why are you crouching? Even if they did happen to look outside, they'd still see you, he said, holding back a smile. Shut it, it gets me in the sneaky mood. She looked up at him standing straight and suddenly pulled him down into a crouch with her. And you're wrong, if they looked outside they wouldn't be able to see me cause of this darkness, but they would be able to see your standing figure against the light of the lantern behind us. She shouted, whispered, earning a laugh from Ace. Stop laughing, this is serious business here, we're on a friggin' rescue mission here. Ace continued laughing and decided to mess with Riku a bit because she was too tense. Do you think they'd notice if we were here if I did this? He suddenly lighted his fist up in a bright flame, a mischievous smile on his lips. Don't do that, Riku practically shouted as she lunged for the flame and enclosed her hands around it. Ace quickly put it out before her hands could get burned, and his grin got even wider as he realized something. Do you need someone to hold your hand as we go save the crew of the barrage pirates? A large blush appeared on her face as she also realized that both her hands were holding his one hand that he had lit. And no, she said as she quickly pushed his hand away and started making her W. As she and Ace crouched underneath the ship, they could hear a few patrolling Marines walking around on deck. In her head, Riku quickly formulated the guardsman's route. Alright, on 3 we're going to quietly jump onto the ship and then take a left into the door. Got it? She asked and Ace nodded. She listened as the guard's boot sounded above them. 1, 2. The boots turned and started to fade away. 3. They both jumped up and grabbing the railing and hauling themselves over as quietly as possible. They landed with a hollow thud, and before the guardsman could come see what's up, Riku opened the door and the two slid inside. Everything became black as Riku shut the door and the guardsman's lantern went out of sight. Ace lightly lit his hand, allowing them to see what was before them. They walked into a long hallway with a few doors on the sides, and from these doors they could hear the snoring of the crew. Riku started first, though Ace caught up to walk alongside and light the way ahead. The two came to a T-section, in which they could either turn left or right. Which way? Asked Ace as he looked down the left path as if trying to see where it would lead. The left path is a short path leading to a few rooms and then ending. Though if we turn right here, and then head straight, there should be a stairwell leading downward and towards the prison areas. I'm not too sure though, Riku explained, trying to remember the layouts of the ships. Ace gave her a small skeptical look. Are you sure we won't get lost? So maybe I don't know the entire layout of the Marine Science Unit ship, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get lost on it. It's a Marines ship and they tend to have mostly the same layout every time. There's no way you can get lost in a ship, she defended. Ace held his hands up as if in defeat. Alright. I was just wondering, that's all. The two turned right and continued walking, They passed an intersection in the hall and quietly looked for anyone coming before continuing on. Just as Riku predicted, a stairwell was soon before them. Riku turned to Ace and gave him an arrogant look. He let out a fake laugh, ha. Ha. Very funny. You know I never did doubt you. He brushed past her and began walking down the stairs as she rolled her eyes and rushed to catch up to him. Alright, so far so good. Riku looked up the stairs to see if anyone was following them and listening for anyone awake. There should be 3 intersections down here. At the 3rd intersection we'll take a left and head down the hall. The prison should probably be one of the last few doors. Just as she said that, they passed the 1st intersection. Alright, sounds good. By the way, you never told me this, but how do you plan to sneak out 5 bumbling pirates? Ace asked as he thought of how it might work out. When the time comes, we'll think of something, Riku said a bit unsurely. Ace turned to her with a smirk. So our great marine has yet to fully think out the plan. You're becoming more and more like a pirate every day, I hope you know. Riku didn't turn away from looking ahead in the direction in which they were walking. And what's this got to do with any of this? He picked up his pace a little and walked a bit ahead of Riku but turned around to talk to her as they walked. Let's face it, you're not a marine. You act like a pirate, so I think you should ditch the marines and join. Suddenly Ace was cut off as Riku put her hand up in front of his face. Shish. She whispered. She looked ahead, but saw nothing, yet she could have sworn she heard the sound of boots. She turned to her right and noticed that they were in the middle of the 2nd intersection. For a second she saw a flash of something and she squinted her eyes to try and make it out. Turn off your light, she quickly told Ace. What? He asked a bit confused. She put her hand on his lit flame knowing he would distinguish it for fear of burning her. Suddenly she could see it better against the darkness. A blob of light was slowly walking towards them. Is anybody there? The light called. Don't say a word, don't move, Riku said as quietly as possible but for Ace to hear. Reed, is that you? The blob of light started moving faster towards them. Riku pushed Ace a bit, causing him to quickly move to the other side, and since Riku was farther back, she ran back and crouched down. Keep moving, she mouthed to Ace as the soldier finally came to a halt at the intersection. Ace gave her a worried look, but saw the determination in her eyes from the glow of the marine's lantern and with difficulty, continued on. Riku took a few steps backwards as she heard the marine talking to himself. I could have sworn I saw the light of a lantern here a moment ago. I probably still have sleep in my eyes, that's all. I have to hurry and relieve Reed of his shift now, it's getting to be late for him. The marine turned and started heading in Riku's direction. She noticed this and began to panic. I need a distraction, she thought to herself. Pang! The sound came from farther down the hall so suddenly and loudly that the marine soldier whipped his head in the direction in fright to see what it was, and Riku took that chance and slid into the closest room next to her. She slid her back down the door in sigh of relief. She couldn't help but smirk at the thought of it being Ace who made the sound. Pushing herself off from the door, she stood up and scanned the dark room. She deemed that no one was in there, seeing as no one came at the sound of her sigh or the door opening. In the darkness she made her way around the room looking for another door. It's so dark, I can't see where the heck I'm going, she told herself. With her arms in front of her, she found a desk in the middle of the room with a lantern on it. Perfect. She smiled and furiously began searching the desk for matches. Papers fell onto the ground and she opened drawers, sifting through the contents until she finally found what she needed. Found it. She pulled a match out of its box, struck it and lighted the lantern. Suddenly the room became visible and she could see a lab table in the room, along with some equipment, boxes full of papers and the desk which was in front of her. The only door that was in the room was the one she came through. I sure hope people didn't wake up to check out that Pang. As she lifted the lamp off the desk, something shiny caught her eye. A small golden plague with a name on it lay on its side on the desk. Riku picked it up and it read, Dr. Vegapunk. Her eyes lit up. Oh, this must be an old office of Vegapunk Sans. She looked at the messy desk she created as well as the papers that loitered the ground due to her searching. Now I feel kind of bad that I messed it up, even if he never actually figures it out. She scratched the back of her head and bent down to pick up the papers and started putting them back onto the desk. Carefully picking up an older folder, a file slipped out and she looked down at it. A picture of a child? She thought as she noticed it paper clipped to some papers. Riku picked up the papers and brought the file over to the desk to see it better. Her pupils dilated as she suddenly froze, her breath catching in her throat. With trembling lips she attempted to speak to herself. What? Was all that she could muster as her hands had started shaking and she continued staring at the picture. It was the exact same photo Haruhi had in her room in Water 7, the one of Haruhi and her when they were younger. Riku became cold and could feel goosebumps forming on her skin. She swallowed a lump in her throat and she slowly pulled the picture from the paperclip to read the file underneath it. Her shoulders started to shake as she harshly bit her lip. The doe started with the words. Name. Subject are 9 feet. This is the final room here. This better be the prison or I swear I'm going to go on a rampage looking for it. Ace whispered to himself as he opened the door. He winced at the creaking sound the door made and put on his guard. A loud sound was made to his left and he whipped his head in the direction. Holding his breath, Ace walked through the doorway while keeping an eye on the snoring guardsman. He propped the door open and made his way over to the cells. He heard and saw the prisoners beginning to move, their shadows restless against the light of the lantern lit on the wall. He even heard some sniffling come from them. What have these guys been through? Ace thought. Finally a brave soul came forward to see who had come through the door. The face of a pirate came into Ace's view and he recognized it to be one of the captured ones of Clito's crew. Fire Fist? The pirate whispered in surprise. Ace could hear the others behind him also whispering among themselves. Shish. Ace motioned and they began to quiet down. Ace looked over his shoulder at the still snoring guardsman. He went up to the cell door. The keys are on the guard's belt. One of the pirates whispered. Ace just grinned, lit his hand on fire and burned the lock off. Or you could just do that. Ace opened the door and motioned for them to move. They did as they were told and began filing out from the cell and out the open door. One of the pirates however stumbled, landing harshly on the floor. The large pang echoed throughout the ship and the guardsman woke up suddenly. The guard looked at the fallen pirate for a moment. Crap. Run, Ace said as the guard realized what was going on. The pirate got up as the rest of his friends and Ace began running down the hall. Fire Fist. Do you know how to get out of here? One of them asked as they ran next to him. Ace nodded looking behind him as the guard pursued, shouting after them awaking other Marines. Yeah, but first we need to find Riku. Riku? The pirate gives Ace a confused look before finally realizing. The Marine girl? Ace nodded in response. Why don't we leave her? She'll be fine without us. She's with her people now. The pirate tried to persuade. Ace though wouldn't have any of it and shook his head. I'm not leaving without her, you guys can go on ahead, but good luck getting off without me and your hands cuffed like that. The pirates looked down at their still cuffed hands and let out a frustrated sigh. Then we better find her soon. Ace grinned at his answer and picked up his running speed. He turned the corner of the intersection and he suddenly ran into something. However, he didn't stumble backwards. He looked down to see what had run into his chest only to be met with a crop of brown hair. It moved and a face looked upwards at him while rubbing their nose. What in the world? Why's your chest like a friggin' rock? What do you do? Eat rocks for dinner? Ha. Ha. Very funny. I train if you care to know, but now is not the time for that. Ace smiled as he placed a hand on her head and rotating it to face the same direction he was in. What? Why? Did you free them already? She asked curiously, trying to turn around and look behind them, though unable to as Ace still held her head in his hand. Stop right there, pirates, a voice shouted from behind them. Riku stopped attempting to turn around as she registered what was going on. Oh no, she said. No you didn't, she turned to look at Ace. He rubbed the back of his head with a cheeky grin on his face. Sorry, but I did. Ace ran next to her as they lead the group, but as the footsteps behind them began to get louder and closer he slowed his pace. Riku noticing this movement also began to slow, however Ace ushered her to keep moving. Take the lead, I'll be right behind you guys. She nodded and began picking up her pace again. Ace turned to the group of Marines headed towards them. Higan! He shouted, shooting the oncoming pursuers. Riku and the pirates ran up the stairs that came into view and were on the second floor on the inside of the ship. Just a little more, she shouted to those behind her. As they ran, Riku began hearing sounds of running that wasn't theirs. The feet stomped towards them and she let out a frustrated sigh. As the lights of the Marines came into sight in the dark corridors, Riku instantly kneed the lantern holder before swinging her arm out at the next person behind them. She began to notice that more were filling in behind, and if she didn't hurry it up, the corridor would be full, and they would be trapped. She dodged an attack before grabbing the attacker and thrusting him at his comrades, making a way for them to run through. She could see the large metal doors that would take them back to the outside world. However, it quickly became obscured by Marines pouring in from the side doors. Riku narrowed her eyes, ready for a tiring fight. Slugging the first guy in the face, the metal doors suddenly flung open and torches lit up the entryway. Riku stopped in her tracks and squinted her eyes at the newcomers. "Alright guys. Get him," a familiar voice shouted as a mass of pirates came in and began fighting the Marines. The brunette girl grinned, hyped up at this new turn of events. She sidestepped to the left as a sword came down on her and gut-punched the soldier. Familiar flames burst behind her, lighting up the whole corridor. She saw a dark red head waving his claymore wildly around as he and his crew made his way towards her and the free pirates. A group of people stood on the docks next to a pirate ship. A beautiful orange glow began lighting the world and the surface of the ocean caught its fire. Cletos bit his lips before allowing a small, sheepish smile to grace his features. "Thanks for everything." He rubbed the back of his head. The whole rescue team and the barrage pirates were safely back in their part of town. After safely making it off the marine ship, they all booked it back using the night as cover. "Huh? Is the Great Claymore embarrassed?" Riku couldn't help but tease. Cletos clenched his teeth and frowned with a very small tint of pink dusting his cheeks. "No," he denied. "Why would I be embarrassed about giving you guys my thanks?" Ace just let out a grin. "It's no problem." His grin faded into a regular, somewhat melancholic smile. "I understand. With a crew like family, it's hard when you get close to losing them." The captain nodded in understanding. "Really though, thank you. To think that there would have ever come a time where I'm in debt to the great 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates and a marine girl." He let out a laugh. "Yeah? Well, I never thought there'd come a time where I'd be helping pirates, so there's a first time for everything." "Captain, we're all ready to set sail," a barrage pirate shouted. Cletos looked up to the crew member who shouted and gave him a nod. He and some of the others who stood on the deck began boarding the ship. The ship pulls out from the port docks and Cletos and his crew stand by to watch the island they're leaving and to say their final farewells. "Be careful," Riku shouts as she waves to them. Cletos lazily waves back. "You've got problems, beast girl." "Telling a pirate to be careful," he said, smiling with the satisfaction of Riku letting out a string of unintelligible words and waving her fists at him. "If we ever meet on the seas, I would be honored to have a drink with the Whitebeard crew." "We'll make it a festival," Ace yells back. The crew behind Cletos cheers and Cletos just shakes his head before heading inside his ship, and out of Ace and Riku's view. The two stand there watching them for a few more seconds before Riku speaks. "Hey, Ace?" she asked, and he turned his head to her in response. "What's it like to lose someone?" Ace turned his body in the opposite direction of the ship and began to walk, and Riku also began to follow. "Losing someone, huh?" Ace thought about it for a moment. "Well, it's hard to explain, but there's much sadness in it. It's also our everyone." Riku furrowed her brows in confusion. "Different how?" "Well, perhaps different reactions and stuff, but overall it's an overwhelming emotion." "Do you really think I'm the best person to be asking this to?" He chuckled and looked at her. Riku thought about it. Was he the best person to be asking this? "How many people have you lost?" she accidentally said without meaning to. The question caught him off guard and his face clearly showed surprise. He thought about it, his mother, his father who he doesn't really care about, Sabo, and the latest Thatch. "Far too many close to me," he said as silence enveloped the two. They continued walking in the direction in which Ace had left his striker. "I'm sorry about that," Riku quietly said with an unsure voice. Ace gave her a grin. "Haha. Don't worry about it. If it makes you feel any better, there's at least one person who I was close to losing." Riku attempted at a smile. "Oh, WH." She started but stopped and looked at Ace, who also stopped ahead of her, but continued smiling brightly at her. R9, the name echoed in her head. She froze in her spot as her stomach tumbled and her throat suddenly filled with saliva. She bit her lip, unable to find any words to say. "Oh, Is that so? Well, that makes me feel quite relieved. She stuttered and quickly walked to catch up to him. When Riku had made it, they both had started walking again, and in an attempt to change the subject she asked, "So where are we headed next?" "Next?" Ace questioned, and he put his hand on his chin thinking about what they were going to do next. He knew he needed to find Blackbeard again, however. He looked over to Riku, who was still somebody staring at her. "Captain, what about the girl?" Augur asked, looking in a direction across from them. Blackbeard looked in the same direction. "Leave her, she can't do anything." Riku bit her lip at those words and dug her nails into the palm of her skin as she watched them walk away with Ace. She couldn't do anything to save her companion, and cursed her weakness. "Ace." She said his name again, though it came out cracked. "Ace." She said again and continued saying his name, as if saying it would bring him back. For some reason other names began pouring out of her mouth. Luffy. Haruhi. Garp. Chaki. Her eyes shut and her mind went blank. "Scour the area. Search for any survivors," a brunette marine woman shouted as she ordered the men around her. A large man came up next to her wearing a red shirt, with white symbols and an emblem on it. "Godu-san, how does the search go?" "Sentomaru-san. So far we've found some bodies, but most of the civilians had fled at the sound of fighting," the woman, Godu, answered. Suddenly they heard a cry. One of the men called for help. The two decided to see what was up. When they got to the area they couldn't see what the problem was, as a circle of marines were surrounding the area. "What's going on?" Sentomaru asked. One of the marines turned around to answer. "Sir, somebody found a woman pinned under debris. We're all trying to help get her out." Sentomaru's face was impassive. "Move," he simply said, and the marines cleared a path for him. He saw the long-haired woman lying face down. "Have you checked for a pulse?" he questioned, not caring who answered. "Yes, sir. She's well alive and breathing," a soldier replied and saluted, probably the one who found her. In response to his answer, Sentomaru bent down and easily lifted the debris off of her. "Get her out," he simply said as the rest of the marines scrambled to pull her out from under. When she was safely out, he dropped the debris back down and walked over to her, who was getting looked over by Godu. Godu spoke when he got there. "I recognize her face. I think I've seen it back at HQ. What was it? Am I Mikazuka?" Vegapunk's bodyguard looked at the woman's face and was surprised at who he saw. "Subject R9. He said to himself. "Nei-san, are you alright?" Haruhi asked as she placed a cup of water down on the table. Riku gladly accepted it. "What do you mean by alright? I'm totally fine. Why?" Haruhi gave her a worried look. "You mean you don't remember?" She held the serving tray close to chest. Tilting her head in curiosity, Riku let out a nervous laugh. "Haha. What are you talking about?" She took a drink from the glass. "You died." Haruhi looked at her with blank, soulless eye. The water tasted coppery and thick. She looked into the glass and choked on the crimson blood inside of it. "Nei-san." Riku gave her a surprised look. The glass began to overflow and the shadows in the room began moving, expanding and turning the room into darkness. "Nei-san," Riku shouted, grabbing her sister as the blood pooled and began filling up the room. "R9. R9. R9. Her sister repeated, unmoving and unfazed. The blood pooled up faster and was already at their waist. Riku's heart began to beat and her throat clenched. "How do you know that?" She forcefully shook her sister. "How? What?" Words and questions couldn't make it out of her mouth. Haruhi was silent for a while. "You're nothing but a subject." Riku blinked and in Haruhi's place was Luffy. She blinked again and there she saw Ace. And she blinked once more, and replacing them was nothing but a blob of crimson in the shape of a person. The thing grabbed a hold of Riku and began sinking her, pulling her down into the thick liquid which continued to rise. Her breathing became short and the walls surrounding her had already become pitch black. Panicking, she struggled out of the grip, but the hand stuck like glue. She stared up at the dark ceiling which looked just the same as shutting her eyes. Red began coming in from the sides of her vision and she knew it was the end. As fast as everything happened, it was gone. In a sudden blink, she was staring up at a painted sea green, wooden ceiling. She finally noticed she was lying in a white bed with a light blanket around her and was tightly gripping the sheets. The sound of a door opening in the corner across from her right foot was heard. She sat up to see a marine sailor, and the woman she recognized from the barrage kidnapping. "Oh, so you're awake," she said and turned to the other sailor next to her. "Tell Sentomaru that she's awake." She told him and the man saluted before shutting the door behind himself. The woman walked over to Riku's bed and pulled a chair up that was sitting up against the wall. "So, Riku, how are ya feeling?" the ponytailed woman asked. Riku blinked, confused as to what was going on. "Who are you?" The woman's face showed obvious shock. "Yuga, you mean, you don't remember me?" She pointed at her own face. The Commodore gave her a sheepish smile. "Ahahaha. Am I supposed to?" She rubbed the back of her head. Though she clearly remembered the woman from the barrage incident, she didn't say anything in fear of getting in trouble, as apparently this woman knew her. The marine woman huffed and crossed her arms. "It's me, go to Amiko." She looked at Riku and waited for recognition and a response. However, none came. "I fought your partner on testing day." She stood up and shouted angrily. It slowly, but finally came to Riku, who slightly nodded. "Oh." The door opened and in came a larger-looking man whom Riku instantly recognized. Sentomaru-san, her back straightened out of habit. "Geez, thanks for remembering me," Goto said sarcastically. "Haha, sorry." Riku rubbed the back of her head. "I do remember you being quite arrogant though," she thought to herself. Sentomaru turned to Amiko. "Goto-san, go check with the navigator about our course and see how long it'll be till we reach HQ." Goto turned and saluted before taking a second to glance at Riku and heading out the door. Sentomaru watched before turning to Riku. "How are you feeling? We found you on Pepper Island unconscious under a lot of rubble. Could you tell us what happened?" Riku hesitated for a while, almost like a child who didn't want to tattle. Some pirates got into a fight," she simply said. "Just some pirates? There was a lot of damage done to the town. Some of the buildings were even obliterated." Riku quickly decided to change the subject, and she knew just what to change it to. "Sentomaru-san, you work as Vegapunk-san's bodyguard, right?" Sentomaru casually answered, though he figured he knew where this was going. "Yes, though I can't tell you anything as I swore secrecy. Such as the fact that you're subject R9. A silence filled the air around them as Riku suddenly remembered Sentomaru's odd habit of sometimes blurting out things related to himself. That's it. What is up with all this R9 stuff?" she asked. "I already said, I can't tell you." He crossed his arms as if it would seal his mouth shut. "That's a question that has to do more with myself than him. I need to think of something else." She thought and began devising. "Hey, Sentomaru-san. I forgot, but when did we first meet?" Sentomaru tilted his head a bit. He didn't know what she was trying to get out of the question but attempted to be careful when answering. "I first met you when Garp first brought you to Vegapunk's lab at HQ." She just gave him a blank, yet confused look. "Oh, is that so?" "Oji-san, where are we going?" a small, 7-year-old Riku had asked as she followed behind Garp. Garp pointed to a tower ahead of them. "I have a meeting to attend over there." The tower had red bars criss-crossing around it and had an oriental style to it. "I just want you to wait outside while I'm in there." Riku pouted. But that's boring," she said more to herself than to Garp. He let out a laugh. "Would you rather be sitting for an hour or two listening to old men talk or be able to walk, sit and go to the bathroom?" he asked and waited for her reply. She looked up at him with a bit of a disgusted look. "You don't get to go to the bathrooms?" "Bawahahaha. Nope. 'Cause if I get up to leave in the middle of a meeting, Sengoku will get mad." He laughed again at the thought. He was suddenly interrupted though as someone called out to him. "Vice Admiral Garp-san," a voice said coming up from the side of them. They both turned to see who it was. Riku didn't know the large man, however she didn't know a lot of people in the place she called home. Though Garp obviously knew who it was. "Ah, Sentomaru. What brings you? How's Vegapunk?" The man known as Sentomaru stopped in front of them. "He's already in the meeting room. I was just making my way over from the lab to do my duty." He suddenly looked down and noticed Riku standing close to Garp. "Is this her, I presume?" Garp nodded. "Yep. This is her, the cute little girl I've taken in to become a marine." He looked down at her. "Riku," he announced, grabbing her attention to avert her eyes from Sentomaru to him. "This is Sentomaru. Sentomaru, Riku." He introduced them to each other. The small brunette girl looked back at the larger man. It's nice to meet you, she finally said as Sentomaru just gave her a nod in response. The three of them walked into the tower together and began making their way to the meeting room. Once there, Garp opened the door and motioned for Sentomaru to step in, however he shook his head. I will be guarding from out here. Garp looked at him. Alright then. While you're out here then, why don't you keep an eye on Riku too? He nodded in the direction of the girl who was standing in front of one of two guards standing on either sides of the door. She was attempting at making the guard laugh and was successfully breaking his stoic facade as his bottom lip trembled, trying to contain his emotion. Riku, Garp called, and she turned to look at him as the guard let out a huge breath he was holding. Stay out of trouble. He gave her a proud smile before walking in and shutting the door behind him. We met at the lab, Riku quietly said to herself. No, that's not right. We met at the tower. I think. She furrowed HGHT. Then why is it that I can only recall first meeting Sentomaru in front of the tower? She shut her eyes and tried to imagine her first time meeting Sentomaru in the lab, but could conjure no image. Could he have lied? No, that's not possible. He has no reason to. She brought her hand up to her head as she was beginning to get a migraine from all the thinking. Riku, are you alright? Sentomaru asked, knocking her out of her thoughts. She snapped her eyes open and looked up at him suddenly. What? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. I just need some water, that's all. I'm just a little dehydrated. She began moving out of the bed and swung her legs over the side but winced as her ribs felt very sore. Sentomaru noticed. You probably shouldn't move around. We found you pinned under some heavy debris. Riku waved it off. She needed to get away and have some time to think for herself. She didn't want to be stuck and strapped to a bed with all these thoughts, and she really did need the water. How long have I been out for? She asked, suddenly reminded she didn't know the time. We found you around noon and it's around 9 p.m. right now. You just missed dinner. Huh, so it's been that long. I better go get something to eat then so I can recover faster. She eased herself off the bed, lessening the pain. Sentomaru looked like he was about to say something, but she could easily guess and cut him off. If you tell me to stay in bed, I'm going to have to refuse. I'm fine and I could use the exercise. She was hiding the pain as she bit the inside of her lip and walked with light steps that wouldn't pain her ribs. Riku made it to the door and opened it as Sentomaru walked out after her. He pointed the way to the kitchen before telling her he was going to the navigator as he received no word from Goto. She finds her way through the halls and finally makes it to the kitchen. Now that it was past dinner time, she assumed the crew was resting as the halls were eerily quiet. So when she opened the door, she was surprised to see someone there. However, it wasn't a marine crew member like she expected. When she opens the door, there is a large kitchen counter a few feet in front of the door, which she expected. However, then she noticed a hand holding what looked to be a gourd, shaking it as if in hope that more alcohol would come pouring out. Her eyes followed the hand to the owner with long black hair, who was sitting on the floor and leaned up against the counter. The shaking of the gourd had stopped and the hand was slowly brought down as red eyes locked onto brown. Where's the booze? He smiles a bit lopsidedly as Riku was unable to comprehend who this man was and why he was on this ship. She stands there quite confused and with no response, taking in his appearance. The man had tattoos on his arms, hand wraps and bandages wrapped around his stomach, other than that he was shirtless, while wearing a black, samurai hakama and sandals. A few seconds later she almost has an epiphany. Intruder! She shouts and turns around to run out the door, but as she looks down the hallway she notices Sentomaru slowly walking her way. He notices the freaked out look on her face. What is wrong? I was just coming to check on you, he says as he continues walking towards her. She points back into the kitchen. There's an intruder. She stutters, looking back at the stranger who continued at attempting to get drops of alcohol out of his gourd. Once Sentomaru made it next to Riku, who had gotten into a fighting stance. In front of the doorway of the kitchen he looked in, and when he saw the intruder, his eyes narrowed. What are you doing here, Redwater? Redwater? Riku questioned as she turned her head to Sentomaru for an explanation. Sentomaru never took his eyes off the stranger. His real name is Ranger, Arin. He's a mercenary with the alias Redwater for how well he drinks and fights. His next words were for Ranger. What are you doing here? Get off this ship before I throw you off. He took a step forwards towards the man sitting on the ground. Ranger pushed himself to his feet. Hold it, big guy. It just so happens I'm here on business. He grinned lazily as he held up 3 wanted posters and patted the counter behind him. Thumps responded to his pats from inside the counter. Riku finally noticed that the cupboards of the island counter were all tied and tightly shut. Don't tell me they're in there. She finally asked as more banging could be heard. Why would you put them in there? She shouted at him. He began picking the inside of his ear as if the noise of the banging was the cause of his earwax. They wouldn't shut up, so I stuffed them in there to have some peace and quiet, he answered casually. Riku let out a sigh as she walked over to the cupboard, Ranger stepping out of the way to allow her to untie the ropes and open it. 3 figures came tumbling out with their hands and legs tied, and duct tape taped to their mouths. Riku picked up the wanted posters left on the counter and compared the faces. They're exact matches, she told Sentomaru as he walked up behind her to confirm the pirates. He nodded as he picked up all 3 pirates at once and turned to Ranger. This ship first headed towards Marine HQ. There will be no pit stops for you to get off at, he stated as Ranger simply waved it off. No worries, I'll find a way as long as I receive my reward. Sentomaru nods once more to Ranger before turning to leave the kitchen. However, he pauses and turns his head towards Riku. I'm taking them to the prison. He tilts his head forwards just a little bit as he whispers, be careful around him. Lately he's been making a name for himself. Riku nods and salutes Sentomaru as he leaves. After walking out the door, Riku turns to Ranger. She studies him for a few seconds as he returned to drinking droplets of alcohol out of his gourd. She lets out a sigh at his relaxed behavior before moving to the sink and grabbing a glass of water. As she's drinking her water, she notices him giving her a blank, almost soulless stare. She attempted at ignoring it, however it continued, so she furiously set down her glass and shouted, "What do you want, Redwater? Where do you keep the sake?" he asks finally. Riku's jaw drops slightly at the question. Huh? She paused for a moment before answering, why would I give you any? He smiled, think of it as a part of my reward. I did catch those pirates that you all were having troubles with, after all. Silently Riku cursed his pompous attitude, but had to agree with the idea of his reward being more sake than belly. She walked to the storage room in the kitchen where they kept the alcohol and opened the door. The sweet scent spread throughout the kitchen and Ranger made his way, slightly stumbling, to the door. Riku watched his posture and movements carefully, analyzing them, finding openings she could use if she needed to attack him. He's letting his guard down too much. Just because he's a mercenary doesn't mean I trust him. It's obvious he's already had quite a bit to drink already, as his movements are a bit sluggish and they leave openings all over. She watched as he went over to one of the barrels of sake and pried it open. He dunked his gourd and fully submerged it in the alcohol. Once it was full, he lifted it out and took a large swig of it, to the point where Riku could see sake spilling out of his mouth. Ranger wiped the sake from his chin and let out a breath of content. Ah, that's some good stuff. A bit on the weaker side, but it'll do. He began lifting the opened barrel, and Riku watched as the barrel was being juggled a bit between his hands. Here, give it to me. You're going to drop it. She would feel bad if the cooks had to come to a kitchen with a wasted sake barrel and a messy floor. The fact that he also just took another huge drink probably doesn't help either. When she walked over to take the barrel from him, he declined at first, though she continued to pester him, confident that he would drop it and she could do a better job. Ho difference. Once the barrel was passed between the two, a splash of sake had jumped from the barrel and over onto the floor behind Riku. She winced when the full weight of the barrel was in her arms. Normally this wouldn't have been a problem for her, but her injuries impaired her. Turning around, her foot slipped from under her and with the barrel still in her hands she began to fall backwards. It was then that Ranger suddenly appeared in front of her, pulling the sake barrel back up, which she was holding onto, also pulling her back up. How did he? He was just behind me a second ago, she thought to herself as she looked behind her to make sure it wasn't a trick. Are you okay? He asked suddenly, causing her to turn her head back to him. Huh? Oh yeah. Thankful to. She started saying, embarrassed, however was cut off by his talking. Ranger had filled his gourd again and taken another swig when Riku had been talking. Yeah, you're still as good as ever, he said, holding up his gourd of sake and talking to it. Riku deadpanned. He was talking and asking about the sake. So what's your name? Ranger asked. Riku figured he was talking to the alcohol again. However, after a few seconds of continued silence, she looked up to see him staring at her. Huh, oh. Mikazuki. Mikazuki, Riku. Ranger gave a grin. Great. I'm just going to call you Riku, and you can call me Aaron. You're drunk, she bluntly said in response. Whatever you say. So what's on your mind? He asks her suddenly as he downs his refilled gourd. She gives him a questioning look and hesitates on her reply. What do you mean? He sluggishly wipes drops of alcohol from his chin. Well, it's obvious something's got you distraught. He then waved his arm while holding the gourd, gesturing to her. You know how I can tell? He leaned forward and whispered, you haven't had any booze yet. Riku moved in to punch him, however he unexpectedly bent backwards. With his one free hand he placed his hand down and flipped himself back over and up before swiftly appearing in front of her. The sheathed sword that was kept on his side was now held up against her neck. Your eyes are clouded and confused, he said as his deep red eyes bore into dull brown ones. He pulled the sheath away and walked slowly back to the barrel of sake. Riku bit her bottom and as if sensing her discomfort, Aaron spoke again. I'm right, aren't I? He pauses and waits for an answer, however none comes and so he continues. Well, whatever, it's none of my business anyways. He begins drinking more sake from his gourd. I just don't know anymore, Riku hesitantly began. There has just been so much going on lately I can't even comprehend. She thought about her meeting with Luffy and Ace and let out a small laugh. All I can ever remember was growing up and working towards the goal of becoming a hard-working Marine, but… Riku unexpectedly found herself talking more, unable to hold in all her worries. Apparently there was more to my life than I can remember. She thought about her sister, Haruhi, and smiled though it quickly faded as she voiced another thought that came into her mind. I can't even remember the times I had spent with her. I couldn't even remember her. She clenched her fists, though calmed herself as she looked down at the ground, her eyes filled with remorse. There's nothing but a void of memories in my mind. She looked up at Aaron. Hey Aaron, do you think? Z's. TCH. Wake up. B and $%. Riku yells loudly at him. Sluggishly his eyes open and he rubs them. What? He asks with a bit of an irritated tone. I hope you know it's not polite to fall asleep on someone when they're talking. She crosses her arms and lectures him. Aaron scrunches his face in annoyance as he raises his tattooed arms and stretches his back. Yeah, whatever. This just pissed Riku off even more. You just ask about my problems and then wave them off. Well, what a great first impression, Redwater. He lazily lifts an eyebrow, in a questioning way. What happened? I thought we were on good terms. I vaguely remember you calling me Aaron before. Riku huffed. That was before, when you seemed like you cared about any words that came out of my mouth. I was listening though, Aaron said seriously. A bit surprised by his words, her arms fell to her sides. Oh, really? Yeah, something about your life in the Marines or something. He gave her a tired smile. You just repeated 2 words out of everything I said, she shouted at him. Z's. She sighed as she watched him sleep, with his back up against the counter just as she had found him, and his arms strewn over the barrel of sake. She walks to the kitchen entrance and shuts the lights off, and just before she shuts the door behind her she whispers, I have to admit, talking about it really did help me out. Thanks, Aaron. The door shuts and a victory smirk made its way onto the mercenary's face.